Welcome back to Dark Sleep Radio. Today, I'm sharing a solo hiking story from last October near Lake Crescent in Washington that might just send a chill down your spine. The day started perfectly. Cold, damp, with that constant mist that makes everything smell like pine and wet earth. I wasn't heading deep into the backcountry, just far enough off the main trail to feel completely alone. My plan was simple: camp overnight, maybe snap a few photos if the fog looked interesting. By 6 p.m., I'd pitched my tent on a small rise overlooking the lake, close enough to hear water lapping if the wind shifted, but not so close I'd accidentally roll into it. Dinner was quick, just ramen and a granola bar. No campfire, since I didn't want to deal with permits or cleanup. By 8, darkness had settled in, and I zipped into my sleeping bag. The trail had been quiet all day. I hadn't seen another soul or even another car at the trailhead. The woods felt empty in a peaceful way, with only distant owl calls and typical forest sounds breaking the silence. Something woke me around 2:47 a.m. I wasn't cold or uncomfortable, just suddenly alert. The tent fabric seemed impossibly thin. No loud noises disturbed the night, no snapping branches, no animal movements, just an unnatural, heavy stillness that made me hyper-aware. Morning arrived like any other. Low fog hung in the trees as I stretched and stepped outside my tent. Then I saw them, footprints in the soft ground, leading away from my tent in a perfectly straight line. I crouched down and looked closer. I noticed the tracks immediately. They matched my hiking boots' tread and stride, but something felt off. These weren't from yesterday. I would have spotted them when setting up camp. They were fresh, with sharp soil edges still crisp and clear. The path was precise, 100 feet out, then straight back to my tent. No other tracks surrounded them. No animal prints, no additional human footprints. Just this single, perfectly aligned road. I stood frozen, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Sleepwalking seemed a possible explanation, but that didn't add up. I always sleep in a zipped-up mummy bag, not something you casually exit without waking. And I'm meticulous about tent security. I always double-check zippers. The morning's inspection revealed nothing disturbed. My pack, gear, and food bag remained exactly as I'd left them. I traced the footprints to their endpoint near a tree cluster before the lake's slope. The last prints turned around cleanly, as if someone had reached a specific spot, paused, and returned. No wandering, no hesitation, just a direct out-and-back movement. I tried remembering anything, a dream, a half-awake moment, but found only silence and fog. By noon, I packed up and hiked out faster than usual, constantly glancing back. The woods felt different. Occasionally I heard branches shifting in a way that didn't match the wind, subtle movements that didn't quite make sense. At the trailhead, my car sat alone. I checked everything thoroughly, keys secure in my jacket pocket. During the drive, I didn't stop until reaching the main highway. That evening, I scrolled through my phone's photos, typical landscape shots, a blurry crow picture. Then I saw something strange, a completely black frame that shouldn't have been there. Night had fallen completely. A faint light barely pierced through what seemed like distant branches in the top corner. The timestamp read 3:04 a.m., though my phone had been zipped inside my bag in the tent. I couldn't recall taking that photo or leaving the tent, but the footprints told a different story. Kids get obsessed with things. At 9 years old, Eli was no different, cycling through interests like dinosaurs, space, and superheroes. Recently, his fixation was a black triangle shape he couldn't stop drawing in his notebook. We live in rural Iowa, just a short drive from the nearest town. Our house sits on the edge of an endless cornfield, with Eli's school just a couple miles down the road. One afternoon, after picking him up, something felt off. He was unusually quiet, staring out the car window. "Mom," he said suddenly, "there was something over the cornfield today, a big black triangle, and it was watching us." His tone was strange, not frightened, but eerily calm. When I asked for details, he fumbled with his backpack straps. It was really big and didn't move like anything normal. It just hovered, like it was looking. I dismissed it as a drone or helicopter, but Eli wasn't buying it. At dinner, he pulled out his notebook, showing me the same obsessive drawing, a sharp-edged black triangle completely filled in. He said he couldn't get it out of his head. The drawings continued. Every time I glanced at his notebook, there it was, sometimes larger, sometimes smaller, but always solid black. When he thought I wasn't listening, he'd mutter about it watching or waiting. His teacher called one morning, concerned. Eli was distracted, constantly staring out the window toward the cornfield, occasionally talking to himself. That afternoon, hoping fresh air might help, I took him to the field's edge. Juno, our energetic border collie mix, came along. As we walked, Eli kept looking up, scanning the sky. Eli had been pacing around the cornfield, searching intently. He stopped and pointed, declaring he'd found the spot. I strained my eyes into the distance, seeing only tall corn swaying gently in the morning breeze under a cloudy sky. When I asked about details, Eli's description was unsettling. It was flat and black, he said, but without a shadow. The air around it seemed to shimmer. His words hung between us, strange and uncertain. I laughed nervously, suggesting it might look like a heat wave, but he insisted it didn't feel hot. That night, thoughts of Eli's story kept me awake. The next day after work, I walked to the back of the house to investigate the cornfield. The sun hung low, the sky gray and overcast. Something felt off immediately. The air was unnaturally still, with no bird sounds or rustling leaves. Though the field looked normal, an eerie sensation of being watched crept over me. Half joking, I called out, "Anyone there?" Silence answered. As I turned toward the house, a reflection in the barn window caught my eye. A dark triangular shape with sharp edges, hovering just above the corn. In an instant, it vanished. Amy dismissed my story as a trick of light or imagination. But that evening, I found Eli at the kitchen table, drawing the black triangle again. His hands trembled slightly. When I asked if he wanted to talk, he whispered, "It doesn't like it when I do." Strange occurrences began to multiply. Juno barked at invisible things, staring out windows for hours. Yard lights flickered randomly despite clear weather. My phone lost signal repeatedly, unusual for our location. Eli's drawings grew darker, the triangles more jagged and seemingly alive. His sleep became fractured, interrupted by whispers about being watched. One damp afternoon, Amy and I returned to the field. Eli remained near the house, observing. Suddenly, Juno froze, letting out a low, menacing growl toward the corn. As I looked, something inexplicable flickered at the edge of perception. The field seemed to ripple that day, something moving just beyond the stalks. A low humming started, barely audible at first, like electricity through wires. It grew louder for a few seconds, then stopped. We left quickly. Later, I found Eli's notebook on the kitchen counter. The last page was covered with a black triangle, with 3 small dots arranged in a tight triangle inside the bigger one. Eli was asleep, breathing shallow but steady when I checked on him. The feeling lingered the next day. While driving Eli to school, I kept glancing at the field. Shadows between the corn stalks seemed to shift. That black triangle kept showing up everywhere, in drawings, reflections, the very air itself. It felt like something was waiting, watching just beyond reach. Eli stopped talking about it eventually, but the drawings didn't completely cease. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of that shape in my peripheral vision, and my neck bristles with an unsettling sensation. Some mysteries, I've learned, remain unexplained. Then came the morning I woke up with a pounding headache, blood dripping from my nose onto the pillow. Initially, I thought I might have hit my head during sleep, but when I sat up and wiped my face, I noticed something else on my right shoulder. Weird reddish marks where my shirt had ridden up. These weren't ordinary burns. They formed a pattern, like someone had pressed a stencil against my skin. Tiny triangles and lines intricately arranged, reminiscent of geometric puzzles or complex tattoo designs. I'd never seen anything like it on a person before. The night seemed ordinary. I'd fallen asleep in my room with Juno, my dog, curled up at the foot of the bed. Maybe there was distant thunder, but I wasn't certain. Standing proved difficult. The headache was sharp, and my nosebleed continued in slow, steady drips. When I called for my mom, she rushed in, clearly concerned. "Where did you hit yourself?" she asked, pulling back my shirt to examine the marks. "I didn't hit anything," I replied, the mystery deepening. "I guess some things don't make sense, and maybe they never will." The strange pattern on my shoulder caught me off guard. I touched it lightly, noticing it felt warm but not painful. No swelling, no blistering, just an odd geometric shape. My mom cleaned the area and took me to the urgent care clinic nearby. The doctor examined me thoroughly. Blood tests and scans came back completely normal. No burns, no skin damage visible anywhere. But the pattern was right there, clear as day. The machines showed nothing, which was the most unsettling part. It was like the marks existed just on the surface, or my skin was playing some bizarre trick. At school, I tried to act normal, but my mind kept drifting back to my shoulder. By evening, the redness started fading, and by morning, it had vanished completely. Checking the mirror, I saw only my pale skin, no trace of the mysterious shapes. I wondered if it was an allergic reaction or a weird bug bite, but nothing made sense. No one else in the house was affected, and I hadn't changed anything recently. Strange things started happening after that. Soft tapping noises in my empty room, phone glitches with static patterns. Kids at school joked about secret symbols or alien tattoos, which I brushed off. But privately, I wondered if they might be onto something. My parents dismissed it as stress. I'd been having trouble sleeping and focusing, but that didn't explain the nosebleed or the marks. 1 week later, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, Juno suddenly jumped up, ears perked, staring intently at the corner of my room. That night, holding Juno close, I felt a weird chill whenever I looked at my shoulder. It wasn't fear, exactly, more like a deep confusion, as if my body had done something mysterious while I wasn't paying attention. It was just past 2 a.m., and the entire town of Millersville went dark. Not a single street light remained on, plunging the road into complete blackness. I was driving home from a late shift at the diner, just turning onto Pine Street when everything vanished. One moment, dull orange halos stretched down the road. The next, nothing but pitch black, no lamp glow, no headlight reflections on the pavement. The sky was clear, cloudless, yet the street disappeared into darkness. I slammed on the hot brakes, stunned by the sudden blackout. Just as quickly, the lights flickered back on, maybe 10 seconds, possibly less. Something wasn't right. By the time I pulled into my driveway on Elm Avenue, rumors were already spreading. Neighbors were outside, phones were ringing. A low, deep hum hung in the air, something many residents claimed to have heard. Later, strange things started happening near my window. The air felt colder there, like an invisible draft, even though the window was shut tight. Lights flickered briefly, followed by an unsettling tapping sound. My skin crawled, though I saw nothing. I tried dismissing it as nerves and went back to sleep. The next morning, a faint triangular scar appeared on my shoulder, barely visible, like a light scratch. My mom initially missed it, but when she looked closer, worry crossed her face. We visited the doctor, who confirmed the skin was healing normally, but couldn't explain the pattern or its origin. For months, the incident haunted me. The nosebleed never returned, and the scars faded within weeks. Yet the memories lingered. The marks, the tapping, the cold spot felt like an unsolvable puzzle. Sometimes when I'm alone and the light is just right, I sense that cold draft near the window again. Shadows seem to move too quickly in my peripheral vision. I can't explain what happened. Maybe the world holds secrets just beyond our understanding. All I have is a nosebleed, some strange marks, and a few nights that felt fundamentally wrong. Lana and I were home that night when something strange happened. The street lights went out, and with them, a peculiar sound filled the air. It wasn't mechanical, more like a deep, soft vibration that seemed to pulse through your chest. I didn't notice it while driving, but Lana heard it clearly from the kitchen window, describing the sky as softly vibrating. Our dog Rufus was unusually restless, barking and pacing near the front door. We looked outside but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual stars overhead. By morning, the story had spread throughout town. At the diner, customers talked about the same experience. Old Mrs. Caton near the water tower confirmed the streetlights blinking off during her dog walk. Tommy from the gas station claimed his surveillance cameras captured the entire town going dark, yet the power grid showed no reported outage. Officer Daniels, who was on patrol that night, added more intrigue. His radio crackled, and his car's electronics went haywire during those moments. Strangest of all, his dash cam recorded pure darkness for 10 seconds, despite being on a typically well-lit street. Other residents shared similar oddities. One person's wristwatch stopped precisely for 10 seconds before resuming. Another found their phone's clock mysteriously 5 minutes behind after the incident. At first, I wondered if it might be a solar flare or some power grid glitch, but nothing added up. The unexplained event left everyone wondering what had really happened that night, when time seemed to stand still and the town briefly disappeared into darkness. That night before school started in mid-August, something strange happened in Millersville. The town experienced a bizarre phenomenon that left everyone puzzled. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the streetlights would blink out, plunging the block into darkness for a brief moment. The local utility company insisted there were no issues with the power grid, no dips or surges were detected, and transformers checked out perfectly fine. People started talking, and the more they discussed it, the more unsettling it became. I decided to investigate one night, sitting on the porch with Rufus beside me. When 2:14 rolled around, the lights went out again, this time just for a second. Unlike before, I didn't hear the distinct hum clearly, but Rufus was on high alert, his body stiffening. Ears perked up, staring intently at the sky. After the lights returned, a peculiar smell lingered in the air, faint and hard to describe, like ozone mixed with something metallic. Over the next few days, I tried to identify any patterns. The blackout always occurred at the same time, with no apparent cause. Nobody spotted any aircraft or satellites during these moments, though some claimed to see flickering lights high in the stars. Concerned, I called Sarah, my physics teacher friend, and explained the situation. She suggested it might be an electromagnetic disturbance, but couldn't explain how such a targeted blackout could occur without affecting other electronics or causing broader power failures. What made the whole thing even stranger was how localized it was. Millersville seemed trapped in its own bizarre bubble, while the rest of the county remained completely unaffected. The incident was brief but memorable. No dramatic UFO, no glowing objects, just a sudden blackout, a strange hum, and an overwhelming sense that something was watching or waiting. Since those few nights, I haven't heard of it happening again. But sometimes, I catch Rufus staring at the sky, ears tilted, as if anticipating its return. I was 16 that summer, caught in that awkward stage between childhood and something else entirely. And this unexplained event only added to the sense of uncertainty that comes with that age. The night was stifling, even after dark. My parents were asleep, and my little brother Jude had dozed off with his headphones on, lost in some YouTube Minecraft video. My room felt like an oven, with a fan that did little more than shuffle warm air around. Seeking relief, I wandered out to the backyard around 11:30. Our house sits in a quiet cul-de-sac on the town's edge, nestled against a wild, overgrown patch of land that was once farmland. It's an untamed area of brambles and broken fencing, creating a sense of seclusion. I climbed onto the old trampoline and sprawled out, mindlessly scrolling through my phone. The sky was extraordinary that night. Crystal clear, with no moon and barely a cloud, the stars shone with an intensity I rarely noticed. Almost unconsciously, I snapped a photo, one of those meaningless, automatic actions. Without even glancing at the image, I dropped the phone on my stomach and settled back. For about 20 minutes, I drifted, half listening to distant cars and the cicadas' buzz. Then something changed. It wasn't a sudden silence, but a gradual realization that the background noise had vanished. No insects, no rustling, just the distant hum of my window fan. I sat up, straining to listen. Absolute stillness surrounded me. Even the crickets had gone quiet. Something felt fundamentally wrong. Not scary, just unnaturally off. Like the entire backyard was holding its breath. That's when I saw it. A patch of sky that didn't belong. Not moving, not glowing, just a perfect black shape against the starry backdrop. It looked like someone had cut a precise hole in the night and placed a black paper cutout over it. Unlike a cloud, this was sharp-edged and motionless. The air was completely dead, no hint of a breeze. I stood on the trampoline for a better view. Suddenly, the neighbor's garage security light flickered on. I jumped, feeling inexplicably guilty, though nothing was there. Just that impossible black shape hanging in the perfectly still night. When I first noticed the photo, it seemed unremarkable. Nestled between a blurry dinner shot of my brother and a screenshot of my schedule, the grainy nighttime image looked typical. But something was off in the upper right corner. A solid black chunk cutting into the stars, not a smudge or shadow, but a perfect empty wedge, as if a slice of sky had been erased. I remembered that night clearly. After seeing something in the sky, I'd gone outside, looking to the far end of the yard near the broken fence to get a better view past the trees. Everything looked normal. Back inside, I locked the door and turned on the kitchen light, feeling slightly foolish. I told myself it was probably just a cloud. The next morning, I discovered the photo. Zooming in, I realized the shape wasn't like anything familiar. It didn't match the photo's framing, angling upward instead of across. It didn't resemble a bird, plane, or tree branch. I took screenshots and showed Jude, explaining I hadn't seen anything like this when taking the picture. He shrugged it off as a glitch or smudge, clearly uninterested. Determined to understand, I returned to the trampoline. For 4 consecutive nights, I attempted to recreate the image. Same angle, same time, same position, nothing appeared. I cleaned the lens, took dozens of photos at 11:30 exactly, surrounded by buzzing insects and distant dog barks. Every image was identical, except the original. I never mentioned it to my mom or posted online. I didn't want to sound strange or invite questions I couldn't answer. The unexplained shape remained, a silent mystery in my camera roll, present, yet inexplicable. I was driving back from my brother's place in Tampa late at night, around 11:45. He'd been pouring bourbon and talking about some show, and I'd stayed longer than planned. I told him I was fine to drive, and I was. Just one drink in the first hour, dry roads, a route I knew like the back of my hand. I-275 south, then over to St. Pete on Gandandi. Nothing out of the ordinary. Traffic was thin and quiet. Booker, my dog, was passed out in his travel bed in the backseat of the Tacoma as usual. He'd always conk out the moment we hit 50 miles per hour. My dash cam, a basic Garmin model, was running, like always. Not top of the line, but decent. I keep it going because of delivery work and enough near misses to want video evidence just in case. I remember crossing the bridge, that long, brightly lit stretch over the bay. The lights were almost too intense, but better than the pitch-dark water on both sides. A true crime podcast was playing when the road ahead dipped near that half-abandoned rest stop and something changed. Not darkness exactly. Street lights stayed on, road lines remained clear, but something shifted. The silence hit me first. The podcast cut out. I assumed a Bluetooth disconnect, which happens in dead zones. Then I noticed the engine sound, muted, like driving underwater. I checked the speedometer, still around 62, RPMs steady. Later, going through photos on my phone, I found something strange, a dark shape blocking the stars. Just hanging over the yard, impossibly quiet. So quiet I hadn't noticed it at the time. I deleted the original photo accidentally when clearing phone storage, but kept a screenshot in an album with other weird online finds. Sometimes I open that album and stare at the shape, trying to remember if I really didn't see it when I looked up. How could something that big be so silent? I don't know. I just took the photo, looked at the stars, completely unaware something was watching from above. Unexplainable. Maybe a plane without lights, or something on the sensor. Or maybe something else entirely. I was driving. Everything seemed normal. The dashboard lights were steady, and the volume knob on the console didn't respond when I turned it. Suddenly, the windshield went completely black. Not outside the truck, but the entire windshield. No gradual transition. One moment I was under the lights, the next it was like someone had thrown a tarp over everything. I tapped the brakes gently, not wanting to risk a rear-end collision if it was just a headlight issue. But that wasn't it. The dash still showed the headlights were on, yet I couldn't see anything. No road, no signs, no other vehicles. The blackout lasted maybe 4 or 5 seconds. I counted out loud, trying to stay calm. I didn't move the steering wheel, and the truck didn't shake or bump as if it had gone off-road. Then, just as abruptly as it disappeared, everything returned. Lights, road, sound. The podcast remained off, but I could hear the engine and wind rushing through the slightly cracked window. Booker, my dog, stood up in the back seat and started whining, something he only does when he needs to pee. I reached back to scratch his ears, reassuring him we were almost home. My heart was racing. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 12:04. That seemed odd. The bridge crossing hadn't taken that long. Checking my watch, it read 11:59. At the next gas station, an old, run-down place with flickering overhead lights and an empty parking lot, I looked at my phone. It showed 12:05. My cheap Casio watch was 5 minutes behind, which was unusual. I'd synced it earlier that day, and it doesn't typically drift like this. Booker jumped out and started sniffing the grass near the dumpster, then barked once toward the tree line. I saw nothing, just some oaks and palmettos beyond the lot's edge. Back in the truck, with my heart still fluttering as if I'd nearly crashed, I decided to check the dash cam footage when I got home. Once home, I parked in the driveway, walked Booker, got a glass of water, and sat at my computer with the dash cam card. Scrubbing through the footage, everything looked completely normal. My departure from my brother's place, the route through neighborhoods, the highway ramp. I work at a small local radio station in Pine Ridge, Nebraska. It's nothing fancy, just a shed with basic equipment and some antennas on a rickety old tower. Not much happens around here, mostly country music, occasional high school football games, and weather reports. But something strange occurred one late September night. I was driving my truck and the dash cam footage was strange. There's a moment where I'm humming along with a podcast as I pass the rest stop. Then the date and timestamp jumps from 1:11:5643 to 12:01:55 without any transition. 5 minutes simply vanish. The screen goes completely black for about 5 seconds. Not static, not corrupted, just pure black. No sound, no motion blur, no dashboard reflection. It's like a solid black rectangle, as if a lens cap was on, except I was driving. Then it cuts back, and I'm still on the road, humming like nothing happened. But I know something did. I remember counting the seconds out loud, though that part isn't in the audio. It jumps from me humming to clearing my throat. I spent hours in my kitchen watching that footage repeatedly. The GPS data showed a continuous route, a straight shot across Gandandi. I uploaded the video to a private folder and sent a copy to my brother. 2 hours later, he called and just said, "What the hell is this?" The next morning, I checked the truck. No damage, no dirt, no debris. Tires were fine. My dog Booker was acting weird. He wouldn't get in the back seat at first, just circling and sniffing the wheel wells. I eventually coaxed him up with a treat, but he kept staring out the rear window, ears flat. I've driven that stretch twice since then, once during the day, once at night. Nothing strange happened, but each time I passed the rest stop, I felt a tight chest sensation, like I was waiting to hit something invisible. My watches have been acting up too. No matter how many times I reset them, they always drift to 5 minutes slow. I bought a new digital watch last week, and it did the same thing after a day and a half. I didn't have an answer for my brother. I still don't. I was alone on the overnight broadcast shift, with Jenna taking the evening off. The night had a subtle energy, wind softly rattling the windows, dry grass and wood smoke lingering in the air. Around 11:30 p.m., while scanning through GHAM and shortwave frequencies, a strange sound caught my attention. It was a repetitive mechanical noise, not quite musical, but rhythmic. Slow, precise clicks and beeps, cycling through what seemed like a coded pattern. The signal was weak and crackly, barely audible. When I tried recording it on my phone, the sound vanished instantly, but minutes later it returned more clearly. I started noting down the pattern: click, pause, click, pause, click. It resembled Morse code, yet distinctly different, just mechanical ticking. The next day, I reached out to Jenna and other local stations, but no one recognized the sound. Everyone was puzzled about its origin. That's when Russell, a retired radio technician from the edge of town, got involved. With his signal tracking equipment, he began investigating. After a week of careful triangulation, he pinpointed the source to an abandoned field beyond Miller's Road, a desolate stretch of overgrown grass and scraggly trees, miles from any infrastructure. On a clear Tuesday evening, with temperatures around 45 degrees and a thin fog settling, Russell invited me to explore the location. The area was completely isolated. No power lines, no houses, just endless fields stretching to the horizon. The mystery of the strange signal was about to unfold. We were out in the field that night, Russell and I, with my dog Doy. The fog hung thick around us, and something felt off from the start. Doy wasn't her usual relaxed self. She kept close to me, ears alert, soft growls rumbling in her throat. We'd parked on the gravel shoulder where the headlights wouldn't blind us, and the radio signal was coming through clearer than ever. That weird mechanical rhythm kept pulsing. As we stepped out, grass crunching under our feet, the air felt heavy, like more than just fog was pressing down on us. Russell was working his receiver, trying to pinpoint where the signal was strongest. It kept shifting, fading, and jumping around, seemingly centered in a small area, but impossible to lock down. Doi stopped growling, but kept staring intently into the darkness beyond the trees. Then I saw it. Just past some thorn bushes, there was this strange patch of ground where the grass was perfectly flattened in a perfect circle about 10 feet across. Not like animal or human tracks, something else entirely. We stood there, the signal pulsing in our ears, and Russell asked if I heard any additional sounds, a hum or vibration. I listened hard, just wind rustling the tall grass, a distant train whistle. Then suddenly, nothing. The signal vanished completely. No fade, no static, just gone. Russell checked his equipment, but there was only silence now. My flashlight cut through the fog, revealing nothing unusual except that flattened grass circle. We waited another 20 minutes. Nothing happened. The night grew colder, the fog thicker. Walking back to the car, Doi froze. Her ears went stiff, tail dropped low, staring into shadowy spaces between trees. I shined the light where she was looking, but saw only darkness. Russell suggested maybe we'd found some old Cold War transmitter or experimental equipment. But neither of us could explain the signal's sudden disappearance or that strange grass formation. The mystery lingered in the days that followed. I work on a small nature preserve out in the middle of nowhere. Part of my job is checking trail cameras set up around the property. They track deer, coyotes, and the usual wildlife, with occasional shots of folks wandering off marked trails. Nothing fancy, just motion-activated cameras on trees recording short clips when something moves. One morning, a few weeks back, I was having coffee and scrolling through the previous night's footage. It's typically pretty mundane. A raccoon here, a deer there, maybe a squirrel darting across. But then I saw something that made me stop. There was a clip from a camera on the far end of the preserve, near an old clearing surrounded by thick pines. The timestamp showed just after midnight. The footage was grainy, black and white, typical night vision. I saw the usual branch rustling and animals passing through. But what caught my attention was a figure standing at the frame's edge near the tree line. It was tall, really tall, probably 7 feet or more, thin, like a skeleton covered in a tight dark material. I couldn't tell if it was clothing or skin. The figure barely moved, just stood there staring directly into the camera. I tried to make out its face, but shadows consumed any details. No eyes, no mouth, just a vague head and shoulder shape. The signal returned several times afterward, always around the same hour, between 11 and midnight. The pattern never changed. Every time Russell or I tried to record or get close, it vanished like it wasn't there at all. I mentioned it to a few colleagues at the station, but they dismissed it as interference or a prank. The night after we visited the field, I started hearing weird static on our station, even during the day. Not the normal interference from storms or electrical lines, but that same mechanical rhythm, faint, yet unmistakable. It never lasted long, and no one else seemed to hear it. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, hidden in the field or wandering radio waves, waiting for someone to listen. I don't go near the back window at night anymore. And I don't blame her. Neither do I. I was reviewing some trail camera footage when something caught my eye. A tall, shadowy figure among the branches stood completely still for nearly 10 seconds before vanishing from the frame. I kept rewinding and watching, hoping to convince myself it was just a strange tree or a trick of light. But the outline was too clear, too deliberate. That evening, I decided to check the spot myself. The preserve is massive, and the camera sits at least a mile from the main ranger station. Just after sunset, I packed my flashlight and phone, planning to reach the clearing around 10 p.m. The hike felt normal. Crickets and owls filled the air, and the cold bite of early fall nipped at my skin. I didn't expect to find anything unusual, but I kept scanning the trail, half expecting to see something like the footage. When I reached the clearing, I stopped just outside the tree line where the camera had been pointing. It matched the video perfectly, dark, quiet, with stars peeking through tree gaps. My flashlight swept the ground, searching for footprints or any explanation. Nothing. No human or animal tracks. No signs that anything had recently been standing there. Then I noticed something odd about the leaves where the figure had been. The ground looked scorched, as if something intensely hot had been pressed against the vegetation. The marks were shallow but distinct. Brown, brittle patches scattered in a rough oval about 6 feet across. This wasn't fire damage. No ash, no smoke smell. Just leaves that seemed unnaturally singed or dried out. I circled the clearing slowly, my flashlight probing every direction. Only my footsteps crunching on dry leaves and occasional twig snaps broke the silence. A tight knot formed in my chest, though I told myself it was just the cold or nerves. I stayed for about 20 minutes, watching and listening. Nothing happened. No tree movement, no strange sounds, no lights. The stars remained steady and quiet. On my return, I kept replaying the video in my mind. The tall figure, the scorched leaves, the lack of footprints. Something didn't add up. That night, I called some coworkers to see if anyone else had noticed anything unusual. Nobody had. One joked about a ghost, but I wasn't amused. The drive home from my sister's place in Portsmouth was longer than usual. It was late, close to midnight, and I'd lingered longer than planned. An hour and a half of highway stretched ahead of me, a route I knew well, but not typically at this hour. Days later, those events still felt too real to dismiss. I kept returning to the clearing, checking for any changes. The scorched marks on the leaves remained exactly the same, with no spreading or alteration. The ground showed no footprints or signs of disturbance. Hoping to capture more evidence, I set up another camera closer to the mysterious spot. A week passed with no new developments on the new camera. Then, while reviewing footage from a different camera one night, something strange caught my eye. Far from the original location, a dim light moved slowly between the trees. It wasn't like a flashlight, more of a faint, almost pulsing glow that made no sound and didn't seem to originate from any recognizable vehicle or person. Zooming in revealed little due to poor image quality. The light moved smoothly, sometimes vanishing behind tree trunks before reappearing yards away. I noticed something odd about the timestamps. The light would appear for a minute or two, then the camera would stop recording for several minutes before resuming. Something seemed to be interfering with the camera's function. That night at the ranger station, I stayed later than usual, listening intently for any unusual sounds. Only standard night noises broke the silence. But when I glanced out the window, a soft bluish-white glow appeared at the tree line's edge, the same spot where the first figure had originally materialized. It was barely visible, like light filtering through fog. Stepping outside with my flashlight, I approached the glow. It vanished instantly. Since then, I've returned to the clearing multiple times. Nothing like the original figure or that strange light has reappeared. Only those inexplicable scorched leaves remain as evidence. I keep replaying the footage, examining the ground marks, and pondering the mysterious lights. I can't explain what happened. Part of me fears discovering the truth. Yet the footage exists, and those scorched leaves are undeniably real. Some mysteries, it seems, resist explanation. I was driving late that night on Route 4, a road that cuts through some seriously isolated countryside. The fog started rolling in about 20 minutes into my trip, first just light wisps dancing across the asphalt. I wasn't worried. These things usually clear up. But it didn't. Instead, the fog grew thicker with each mile. By the time I reached the Northwood turnoff, I was crawling at maybe 35 miles per hour. My headlights were useless. High beams just made the white mist more impenetrable, like I was swimming through dense, cloudy soup. No other vehicles were around, just me and this eerie, muffled silence. Midnight found me near Deerfield, where the landscape opens up into wide, empty fields. I knew this area well, an old, half-collapsed red barn to one side, power lines stretching along the southern horizon. Something felt off. No crickets chirped, no wind rustled. Only the soft hum of my tires and occasional squeak of windshield wipers broke the stillness. Suddenly, my GPS froze. The last instruction, continue on Route 4, hung on the screen. No movement, no rerouting. Simultaneously, the radio went dead. No static, no gradual fade, just absolute silence. The screen showed no signal, as if I'd entered some invisible dead zone. Then I noticed the fog above me turning black. Not just darker, completely, impossibly black, like something was deliberately blocking out the moonlight. Leaning forward, I peered through the windshield. Nothing. Just an impenetrable darkness hanging overhead like a solid ceiling. I slowed to a crawl, maybe 25 miles per hour. Looking out the driver's window, the familiar landmarks vanished. The barn, the power lines, all swallowed by shadow. I cracked the window, stuck my hand out. No rain, no wind. But I felt something, a strange low pressure, a vibration in my palm that wasn't quite sound. Inside the car, the light began to dim, not like a dying battery, but as if something was deliberately draining the brightness. Dashboard lights, GPS glow, even the tiny blue LED on my charger, all growing fainter. I was driving home late at night from our family cabin. We'd been there for a few days, just me, my wife, and our son Jake. It's way out in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place where you drive miles through dense woods before reaching anything. The road stretched ahead, straight and narrow. Fog surrounded me, and I could barely see more than a few feet in front of the car. My fingers were cramping from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. Suddenly, everything started to feel strange. The dashboard lights began to weaken, like someone was slowly turning down a dial. I glanced at the time, 12:04. Then everything went dark. The dash blinked once and froze. I tapped it, hoping it would somehow restart. Just as quickly as it had disappeared, everything came back to life. The GPS jumped to full brightness, showing my location as if nothing had happened. The radio resumed mid-sentence, and the dark overhead was replaced by fog, softly illuminated by moonlight. I pulled over onto the dirt shoulder, my hands shaking. When I checked the clock, it read 12:05, but my phone showed 12:06. Something felt off, so I took a screenshot. My phone and car are usually synced to the same network, which made this discrepancy odd. After a moment, I pulled back onto the road and continued driving. The fog thinned out around Epsom, and by the time I reached the 393 split, it had completely disappeared. I got home around 1:30 and didn't really process how strange the experience was until later. What stuck with me was the time. Looking at the screenshot, I saw 12:62. When I'd pulled over, the dash had read 12:44:15. I'd driven maybe a quarter mile during this time, but it didn't feel like 2 full minutes had passed, more like 45 seconds. The next day, I tested this feeling. I sat in my car, turned everything off, and counted out loud while watching the clock. Exactly 47 seconds. A week later, I drove the same stretch of road during daylight. Everything was normal. The barn was still there, power lines intact, no tunnels or dead zones. I even called my sister from that spot, and the call went through without issue. I haven't told anyone about this experience. It doesn't sound scary when described, just flickering lights and a GPS cutting out. But in that moment, it felt like something massive was hovering above me, watching. Since then, I've avoided night drives, especially through fog. We'd gone to the cabin for a break from everything. Jake could run around freely, and we were looking forward to some quiet time. The first 2 nights passed without incident, just the usual sounds of nature. Crickets chirped, wind rustled through the trees, and occasionally an owl would call out. But the 3rd night was different. We were sitting around the fire pit, Jake roasting marshmallows while my wife and I sipped coffee. The sky was crystal clear, stars blazing brightly without any light pollution to dim them. It was exactly the peaceful moment we'd hoped for. Then, everything changed. My wife suddenly pointed toward the tree line and asked, "What's that?" I followed her gaze to the thick forest bordering our cabin. Initially, nothing was visible in the darkness. Gradually, a small glowing sphere emerged just above the treetops. This wasn't like any light we'd seen before. It was perfectly round, smooth, with a soft white glow that had a slight bluish tinge around its edges. The sphere rose slowly, hovering about 50 feet above us in complete silence. No buzzing, no sound, just absolute stillness except for our crackling fire. Jake froze mid-marshmallow, staring wide-eyed. My wife looked bewildered. I blinked, wondering if I was imagining things. An unsettling feeling crept through me, not panic, but a deep, inexplicable unease that made my stomach tighten. Without warning, the sphere rocketed straight up, vanishing into the sky faster than anything I'd ever seen. No trail, no sound, One moment it was there, the next, gone. We sat stunned. When I checked my watch, only 30 seconds had passed, though it felt much longer. "Did you see that?" Jake whispered. My wife nodded, her face pale. We had no explanation. The weirdness continued the next day when Jake discovered strange marks in the dirt near the cabin. Something extraordinary had happened, but what? Here's the rewritten text. The first signs were strange circular marks near the cabin's edge. About 2 feet wide, they looked like something had been pressed perfectly into the ground. No footprints, no drag marks, just these precise circular indentations leading unevenly toward the woods. We wondered if a heavy branch had fallen, but the circles were too exact and no broken wood was nearby. That night changed everything. Around 3 a.m., I couldn't sleep. Something felt different outside. From the window, the forest looked still, but a faint light flickered in the distance behind the trees. It was too small and steady to be a campfire. I watched it move slowly along the tree line, just beneath the canopy, never breaking through the branches. Smooth and gliding, it didn't blink or change color. I called my wife quietly, but when she looked, the light vanished. Was it my imagination? I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. By the third night, the air felt heavy, like unseen eyes were watching. We huddled close, the fire burning brighter than before. Then it appeared again. Same location, same silent rise above the trees. This time it lingered, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. I noticed it pulse gently, the light thickening and thinning in waves, almost like breathing. Jake whispered, "It's watching us." I wanted to deny it, but deep down, I wasn't convinced. When the sphere shot up and disappeared, my wife said we'd pack up tomorrow. We worked in silence, loading our gear. Driving away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it again. The sky was empty. Months later, in quiet moments, I still catch a faint glow beyond the trees outside my window. I can't explain what we saw or why it was there. But those nights changed something. The woods no longer felt like home, but a place where we didn't belong. I'd been a highway patrol officer in northern Nevada for over a decade. Most days were routine. Long empty roads, speeders, occasional drunks. Quiet work, especially on night shifts. This happened in January 2019, a month I remember because snow had fallen that afternoon and we'd worked a rollover just south of Battle Mountain. I was working the swinging shift and stayed out late finishing paperwork in my cruiser. The drive back to the station was along a service road running parallel to I-80, a road that barely sees any use. No streetlights, no traffic, just flat sagebrush and old fence lines. I drove slowly because of the black ice, maybe 45 miles per hour at most. My dashcam was running the whole time, as usual. The night was still and clear, with visibility that would normally let you see headlights coming from miles away. I didn't pass anyone, and there were no lights in the distance or animals around. I remember glancing in my rearview mirror a couple of times and seeing nothing but darkness. By just after 3 a.m., I was back at the station, parked, and inside finishing my shift. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The strange part came later that week during our routine Friday dashcam check. We always verify that footage syncs correctly and nothing glitches. My sergeant asked me to pull up the file from that Tuesday night since I'd been out the latest. As I loaded the file, covering 2 to 3 a.m. and fast-forwarded, something caught my eye. At first, it was subtle, 2 tiny dots of light behind my cruiser. Faint, but definitely there. These headlights appeared in the footage around 2:41 a.m. I paused the video, trying to recall if I'd seen anything. But I hadn't. I would have remembered if someone was following me out there, especially that close. In the footage, the lights stayed right behind me for several minutes. They weren't tailgating, just pacing me from about 100 yards back. I scrubbed through the next few minutes, and the lights remained constant, never closing in, never falling back. Checking my side mirrors in the footage revealed nothing, just pure blackness. At 2:48 a.m., the road bends slightly left around an old drainage ditch, a stretch I remember clearly because of a row of wooden posts where I always slow down for potential ice. As I dipped left in the footage, the lights behind me dimmed and then vanished. Not a gradual fade or a passing. They simply blinked out as if someone had flipped a switch. One frame they existed, the next they were gone. I rewound and played it again, slower. The result was the same. I was driving alone on a familiar stretch of road, reviewing the footage from my patrol car's cameras. Something strange caught my eye. The timestamp showed the lights first appearing at 24:1113 and vanishing at 24:0806, which meant they followed me for almost 7 minutes. I was traveling at about 43 miles per hour, and whoever was behind me would have had to maintain a perfect pace without showing headlights in my mirrors. Both the rear and dash cameras told the same story. Lights appeared in the distance, tracking me, and then suddenly disappeared. Our equipment is top-notch, high-mounted cameras with night vision that record continuously. There was no way these lights were a reflection or interior glare from inside the car. I brought my sergeant in to review the segment. He watched silently and suggested it might be a logging truck or someone hunting jackrabbits. But we both knew this area. It's a fenced-off stretch with no turnouts or access roads. If it was a vehicle, it should have shown up in my side mirrors. But it didn't. I checked everything. No other units were in the area that night. The 911 logs were clear. No calls, no breakdowns, nothing. The next night, I drove the same route and parked near that bend. Nothing happened, just empty road and cold wind. What stuck with me were those lights. They were unnaturally steady, 2 solid points low to the ground, never bouncing or flickering. Even over uneven terrain, they maintained a constant distance. I've driven this route hundreds of times. If a vehicle was truly out there, I would have seen or heard something. But there was nothing. Just those lights following me for 7 minutes, then gone. I saved the footage in a private folder, unable to explain what I'd witnessed. Here's the rewritten text. This isn't a typical incident report. Nothing happened that could be called a crime or damage, just something bizarre that never repeated itself. We were working a wildfire on the forest's edge that Tuesday, where trees grow so dense you can barely glimpse the sky. Our small crew of 6 was tasked with containing the blaze before it threatened nearby towns. It's grueling work. You get used to being perpetually covered in soot, sweat, and smoke. We'd been on the fire line for about 4 hours, setting up hoses and digging fire breaks. The wind kept shifting, which made everyone tense. Though not a massive fire, we knew how quickly it could spread in such dry conditions. Working near a ridge, the smoke was so thick it blocked out sunlight, casting everything in an eerie orange haze. As evening approached around 7 p.m., Jesse spotted something strange in the smoke above the ridge, a light. Initially, I assumed it was a helicopter or plane, but those had stopped flying hours ago. This wasn't a typical search or navigation light. It was a bright, steady white orb about 10 feet across, hanging motionless in the smoke hundreds of yards away. The light descended slowly, then stopped. Complete silence fell over our crew as we watched. Smoke twisted around the glowing sphere, yet the fire continued burning normally at its edges. We were baffled. Jesse was certain it wasn't a drone or Forest Service equipment, but nobody could explain what we were seeing. For 5 or 6 minutes, the light remained perfectly still. No pulsing, no flickering, just an unnerving calm amid the fire's chaos. Then it began rising, first slowly, and then accelerating until it vanished into the thick smoke above the ridge. And then something even stranger occurred. The fire had stopped dead, like an invisible boundary marked its limit. A perfect circle, about 50 feet across, stood untouched within the burned landscape. No burnt leaves, no blackened trees, just a clean, crisp line separating scorched ground from pristine forest. We radioed base, but static garbled our transmission. When someone finally answered, they instructed us to hold position and wait for the night crew. We set up camp near the ring's edge, watching the glowing orange sky and dense smoke. The crew was unusually quiet, nobody joking or attempting to explain what we'd witnessed. That night, I couldn't sleep. A low hum beneath the fire's crackling sounded like a distant idling engine, though nothing else surrounded us except the forest. At dawn, I walked to the fire ring. The air inside felt cooler, the smoke smelled faint, almost as if the fire had never existed. Something caught my eye. The trees just inside the ring looked different. Their bark was smoother, leaves a slightly darker green. Subtle, but once noticed, impossible to ignore. I mentioned this to the crew, but no one seemed to register the change. Maybe exhaustion or a desire to move on dulled their perception. Fire crews arrived later, reinforcing fire breaks. Yet the fire never crossed that mysterious circle. We spent hours confirming the line's integrity. Leaving, I glanced back. The perfect circle stood stark against the blackened forest, strange and unexplained. Since then, I've investigated satellite images and fire reports. No one else documented the ring or the light. The official narrative describes a standard wildfire, supposedly contained by standard conditions. But I remain unconvinced. Sometimes in the night, I swear I hear something. The morning was cold, but not unbearable, with mid-30s temperatures and damp woods from the overnight frost. Me and Nate were hunting elk, moving slowly eastward toward open timber, barely talking as we waited for fresh signs. The light filtered through branches in a soft gray-blue hue just before turning golden. About 20 feet behind Nate, I watched him stop suddenly and hold his hand out, palm down, our usual signal to freeze. 30 yards out in a patch of brush near a narrow trail, a doe stood motionless. Something felt off immediately. The deer was frozen mid-step, one leg raised, head tilted slightly upward, not looking at us but staring above. No ear flicking, no movement. We watched for what seemed like an eternity, maybe 10 seconds or more. The deer didn't blink, didn't twitch. Following its gaze, I looked up. Initially, nothing seemed unusual. The sky was mostly clear, with a few wispy clouds catching early sunlight. But just past the tree line, where the deer was looking, a shape hung suspended. Not glowing or illuminated, just pure black. A wedge-like form, neither sharp nor pointed, floating silently. It was enough that any noise should have been audible. Yet there was nothing. No wind, no rustling leaves, just absolute silence. Later, as I reflected on that moment, a faint hum lingered in my memory, like a distant machine running quietly beyond the trees. Something had been watching us that morning, something that didn't want us in its territory. Though we left the forest behind, the perfect stillness of that moment remained etched in my mind. A strange, unexplained encounter that defied explanation. It was strange and motionless, a weird shadow or cloud formation that didn't belong in the sky. Where it hung, the stars simply vanished, creating a dark void. Just to the left or right, stars twinkled normally, but this thing blocked everything behind it. A deer stood frozen nearby, one hoof raised, staring upward. Nate whispered, "You see that?" I nodded, though I'm not sure he noticed. We remained completely still. A strange pressure filled my ears, like being underwater. It didn't hurt, just felt odd and made me swallow repeatedly. Suddenly, the deer jerked its head down, looked around as if waking from a trance, and bolted into the brush without acknowledging us. Something had broken the moment. Nate's look said it all. What the hell? When I glanced back up, the shape remained, but seemed subtly rotated, not spinning, just slowly pivoting. No sound accompanied this movement. We stood watching for another minute or two as the light gradually changed. Then it was gone. Not fading, not moving, just absent. The stars reappeared as if nothing had happened. We stayed out a few more hours, but saw nothing. No elk, no deer, no birds. Even the squirrels were silent. Nate remarked how still everything felt, like the forest was holding its breath. Back at camp, we avoided discussing what we'd seen. We both hoped ignoring it would make the experience seem less bizarre. That night, something heavy walked near the camp's edge, breaking twigs. We told ourselves it was probably a moose and didn't investigate. The next morning, we packed up early. Our original plan to stay through Sunday dissolved unspoken. Nate simply said, "Let's try a different area next time." An hour after leaving, we spotted another deer by the roadside. A doe, standing motionless, facing the tree line, head slightly raised, not eating, not moving. I've hiked this trail countless times near my hometown. It's nothing special, just a simple dirt path winding through old pines and scrub. Late afternoon, with the sun starting to dip and that distinct earthy smell hanging in the air after a light rain, I set out like always. My usual pack was with me: water, snacks, compass, phone. GPS can be unreliable out here, so I rely on my compass, even though I know this route like the back of my hand. Everything felt completely normal at first. My boots crunched against the dirt, birds called out occasionally, and I had a loose plan to walk maybe 2 or 3 miles before turning back. About an hour in, I paused on a small ridge overlooking the valley. Out of habit, I pulled out my compass to check direction, and that's when things got strange. The needle wasn't behaving normally. Instead of being steady, it was moving slowly, spinning deliberately, maybe a full rotation every 10 or 15 seconds. No obvious magnetic interference was around, just trees and dirt. I watched, trying to make sense of it. Eventually, the needle slowed, stopped, and pointed north like nothing had happened. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a quirk or minor malfunction. 20 minutes later, something felt different. The trail had become narrower, the trees denser, and the sunlight dimmer through the tree canopy. I thought I might have accidentally taken a side path, but I didn't remember seeing any forks. My phone's GPS wasn't working, no signal. An uneasy feeling started creeping in. I continued, walking, hoping to find something familiar. The trail seemed to twist more than usual. When I checked the compass again, it was pointing north normally, but the scenery didn't match up. Something was definitely off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Nate and I would discuss this later, passing the spot slowly without stopping. We both agreed something looked different, but we couldn't explain exactly what. The forest had grown dense and quiet around me, swallowing the familiar ridge I'd seen earlier. No valley view remained in sight. When I tried to retrace my steps, the path only wound back into more trees, taking me deeper into an unfamiliar landscape. A low humming caught my attention. At first I thought it was the wind, but something felt different. The sound was mechanical, faint but unmistakable. I scanned the surroundings, finding no power lines, towers, or any man-made structures. Yet the humming persisted, seeming to emanate from within the woods themselves. As the sun sank lower, shadows stretched and strange shapes flickered at the edges of my vision. Whenever I turned to look directly, nothing was there. An unsettling sensation of being watched crept over me, as if something followed just beyond my perception. My compass began behaving strangely. It spun slowly at first, then suddenly jumped, pointing directly south. Something was wrong. I tried to backtrack, but the trail looked identical in both directions. Same trees, same dead leaves, same rock outcroppings. I felt trapped in a loop. My phone showed a full battery, but no signal. The map app couldn't locate me, and calls to my wife wouldn't connect. The compass needle spun again, then snapped back to north. In an instant, I was standing at the trailhead, exactly where I'd started. The parking lot was unchanged. My car sat in its original spot. The trail sign remained, its sticker still peeling. My chest tightened as I tried to comprehend how I'd walked for nearly 2 hours, yet ended up precisely where I began. My watch showed the same time as when I'd started the hike, though I knew time had passed. Without hesitation, I got in the car and drove home, taking no detours, just leaving behind the inexplicable experience. Last fall, during a solo camping trip in western Montana, I found myself in a secluded spot I've visited several times before. It's a small clearing tucked between two ridges, a few miles off the main road. Not an official campsite, just a quiet flat patch near a stream where I go to escape and recharge. That night was typical at first. I set up my tent, built a small fire, and ate a boil-in-a-bag meal around 8 p.m. Darkness fell quickly, with no moon and only stars overhead. By 9, the night was pitch black, except for my campfire. My phone showed no signal, which was normal. I usually switched to airplane mode to conserve battery. Around 9:30, while finishing a granola bar, I noticed something odd in the sky. A small white dot that blinked steadily, unlike any aircraft I'd seen before. It hovered motionless above the eastern ridge, blinking at precise 2-second intervals. Something felt different about this light. No red or green markers, just a consistent, almost mechanical blink. Curious, I started playing with my flashlight. I clicked it in different patterns, once, twice, then 3 slow blinks. To my surprise, the skylight responded. 2 blinks, a pause, then 3 blinks. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Was I imagining this? When I got home later, I checked my phone repeatedly. The day's earlier messages were there, but nothing new. No missed calls, no texts. Sleep came difficultly that night. The strange humming sound and visions of a spinning compass needle haunted me. I've returned to that trail since, but never taking the same route. What happened remains a mystery, one I doubt I'll ever fully understand. The woods were silent. No wind, no bugs, nothing. Just the crackle of fire and a steady blinking above the trees. I noticed a pattern, one long press, then 2 short ones, then another long one. About 5 seconds passed, and the light repeated the same sequence. 1 long, 2 short, 1 long. A weird pressure settled in my chest. Not quite panic, but something felt off. I stood up and walked a few feet from the fire, still holding my flashlight. I blinked a completely random pattern and waited. The response came almost instantly, with perfect timing. This wasn't playful or friendly. It felt like something was watching and copying me, but not in a human way. It was robotic, programmed to mirror my actions with exact precision. No human-like delay, just tight, mechanical mimicry. I tested it further, flashing as fast as possible, 4 blinks per second, then stopping. I thought no one could match that speed. 5 seconds later, an identical rapid flash came back. Unnerved, I turned off the flashlight and backed toward the fire, unable to look away. The light hovered in the same spot, blinking on a delay that seemed tied to my actions. Eventually, I sat down and watched, not wanting to signal again. It returned to its original slow pattern, blinking once every 2 seconds, either losing interest or waiting. I tried to continue my night, letting the fire burn lower before crawling into my tent. Everything zipped tight, flashlight beside my sleeping bag. The time was 10:42 p.m. Sleep never came. I lay listening to the absolute silence, thinking about how perfectly the light had mimicked me. Around 1 a.m., I unzipped the tent and looked out. The fire was now just glowing coals, the sky still clear. The original light remained in its exact spot, slowly blinking. Then I noticed something new, a second, smaller light lower in the sky, closer to the treetops. Initially motionless, it just hovered. I set up trail cameras on a Saturday morning before heading out to the woods behind my place. It's private land, nothing special, but I like checking for deer and other wildlife. These cameras have been with me for a couple years, usually catching squirrels, rabbits, the occasional deer, sometimes a raccoon. Nothing unusual. That day, I placed a camera near a small clearing about a mile in. It was a natural spot, no big trees in the center, just grass and low bushes. I thought it might be a good area for animals to pass through or rest. I left it there, went back to camp, and planned to check the pictures in a few days. When I finally reviewed the footage, I pulled the SD card and inserted it into my laptop. The first few photos were completely black, no light at all. I suspected the battery might have died or the camera malfunctioned, but I kept looking. Then something strange happened. About 10 seconds in, it blinked once, then again, slowly, not in sync with the original light, but separate. I'm not sure how long I sat watching, maybe half an hour. I started feeling lightheaded, as if time was moving differently. It's hard to describe, but hours and minutes seemed to blend. I'd check my watch and it would say 5 minutes had passed, yet it felt like 20. Eventually, I crawled back into my sleeping bag, turning away from the tent flap, eyes open. The blinking continued. No noise, no other movement. I didn't sleep that night. When the sun rose, both lights were gone. The sky was clear blue over the ridge, as if nothing had ever been there. I packed up quickly, skipping breakfast and coffee, and hiked out. Sitting in my car, I kept looking up, half expecting the blinking to start again, but nothing appeared. Later, when I told my brother about it, he thought I was joking. I showed him my flashlight and explained the exact sequence. He laughed, suggesting it might have been a drone or satellite glitch. But I know what I saw. I know how it responded, how precisely it copied my light clicks, and how unnervingly still the woods were afterward. It felt like something was waiting just above the trees. I spent hours scrolling through the camera's images from the past few days. Something was wrong. Every single photo was pitch black. No outlines, no shadows, nothing visible at all. The camera had worked perfectly fine before and after this period, with timestamps showing pictures triggered every 30 seconds, as usual. Then I found one image from the second night that was completely different. Instead of darkness, the clearing was filled with dozens of tiny points of light hovering just above the ground. About 50 or 60 small lights, each no bigger than a firefly, were scattered across the frame. They weren't like animal eyes with red reflection, just soft, glowing white dots. Some clustered together, others spread out, almost like fallen stars, too dim to be immediately recognizable. I studied the picture intently. The camera's infrared flash revealed the clearing's faint shape, with these lights frozen perfectly still. The surrounding images returned to complete blackness. This wasn't a simple camera glitch. Something strange was happening. The next night, I returned to investigate. Equipped with a flashlight and headlamp, I searched the clearing carefully. Everything looked normal. Grass, bushes, no disturbed leaves or unusual footprints. I scanned the area, waiting and watching, but saw nothing. The woods remained quiet, with only occasional cricket or owl sounds, yet something felt off. The air grew inexplicably heavy and colder than the surrounding forest. Background sounds seemed muffled, and an unsettling sensation of being watched crept over me. As I walked back to my truck, I heard movement behind me, leaves rustling, twigs snapping. I spun around, seeing only trees and shadows. Though I tried convincing myself it was just a passing animal, a deep sense of unease persisted. Back home that night, I plugged the camera's card into my laptop and started digging through photos from the surrounding cameras on the property. Something wasn't normal. Some images had strange things. Dark shapes that didn't look like animals. Shadows that didn't match anything I'd seen. One photo showed a blurry shape just beyond a tree line. Too dark to identify, but definitely not a deer or a familiar person. The outline was too thin, and the limbs didn't move like a human's would. I kept scrolling, feeling increasingly uneasy. The timestamps caught my attention. About an hour before the clearing photo with the lights, I noticed gaps in the timeline. Even though the cameras were working, entire blocks of time were missing, around 20 minutes total. Zooming into the clearing photo, the lights looked odd, not like fireflies or insects. They were too steady and perfectly round. Some pulsed faintly, but not blinking or flickering as you'd expect. I showed the photos to a hunting buddy. He laughed, suggesting a camera sensor glitch or distant light reflections. But there were no houses nearby. The nearest building was at least a mile away, and the clearing was surrounded by thick forest. That night in the clearing kept replaying in my mind. The strange air, the unnatural silence, the feeling of being watched. Maybe I was imagining things, I told myself. Maybe the woods just mess with your head. A few days later, I returned to check the cameras. New photos revealed the blackouts had returned. Entire sequences showed nothing but total darkness, despite a clear, moonlit night. Then in one picture, I saw something faint, a blurry, almost transparent shape near the clearing's edge. It wasn't a person or any known animal. A vague humanoid shape, distorted and half there, just out of focus. I stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I was hiking the Pin, Eridge Loop, late one afternoon in early fall. The trail was quiet, with dry ground and cool air. Autumn had settled in, bringing stillness to the woods. No bugs, minimal wind, just the sound of my boots and occasional scurrying squirrels. I passed only one other hiker heading back, exchanging a quick nod before continuing on. By the time I reached the ridgeline, the sun was sinking below the valley's far side. I stopped at a familiar flat rock outcrop that offers a sweeping view of trees and hills. Usually, this spot teems with life, birds circling, deer moving below. But that evening, everything was eerily still. That's when I noticed something unusual. At first, I thought it was a drone hovering about 150 feet above the opposite ridge. It wasn't moving, just suspended in place. The object caught the light in a strange, dull way, like metal underwater. Its shape defied easy description, not quite round, not sharply defined. Later, I couldn't shake the experience. I checked my trail cameras repeatedly, obsessing over the timestamps and images. Black pictures, floating lights, blurry shapes. Nothing made sense. I asked a local game warden about potential explanations. He suggested camera glitches, bugs, moisture, or heat waves, but nothing matched what I'd seen. I continue to go hunting and keep my cameras running. The clearing looks normal, the woods as quiet as always. Yet sometimes when I look at those photos, I get that same unsettling feeling. Like something unseen watches from just beyond the trees, waiting. I don't know what it was, but the memory lingers. The sky blazed orange and pink as sunset painted everything in warm colors. Everything, that is, except the object hovering perfectly still above the ridge. It looked like a stretched-out drop, completely motionless, unlike most drones that usually wobble when holding position. Something felt off. The object remained a flat gray, refusing to catch the evening light. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled out my phone to investigate. I wanted to zoom in, maybe identify what kind of drone this was. The moment I raised the camera, everything went wrong. The screen blurred completely, not just the object, but the entire view. Autofocus seemed broken, stuck at the wrong depth. I tapped, switched modes, tried to zoom, nothing worked. Then suddenly, my phone's battery indicator plummeted from 89% straight to 0, with no warning or gradual fade. An eerie stillness settled around me. The object remained exactly where it had been, but now something had changed. It felt aware. I know how crazy that sounds. Carefully, I began backing away from the outcrop. No sudden movements, no turning my back, just slow, deliberate steps downhill until the ridge blocked my view. The forest felt wrong. Not loud, not quiet, just wrong. No birds, no wind, only my footsteps and a faint, high-pitched ringing in my ears. I stopped to check my gear, but everything was off. My phone wouldn't respond. I started moving faster. The trail to the parking lot wasn't long, but it felt endless. I kept glancing back, sensing something behind me, even though I was alone. A weight hung in the air, unexplained and unsettling. I reached the parking lot just after the last light disappeared from the sky. Mine was the only car left. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a second with the engine off, staring into the trees. My phone was still dead. I didn't turn on music. I didn't check the rear view. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel too tight the whole way. The moment I noticed the ringing stop, not fade, just stop. Every hair on my arm stood up. I kept going. Didn't stop again. I was at the trailhead with the 4A sign and the little carved arrow when it happened. The weirdest part came the next morning. I plugged in my phone overnight. It turned on like normal. Battery showed 82% when I woke up. I checked my photos and videos. Nothing from that hike, not even the stuff I took earlier on the trail. My entire camera roll from that day was gone, and the timestamp for the last file saved 4:17 p.m., over an hour before I reached the ridge. The storm came on fast that night. We were all sitting around in the living room, me, my wife, and our 2 kids, when the power cut out. 1 second, everything was fine. Then the lights just blinked off. Total blackout. No street lights, no neighbors' houses visible at first through the windows, just the sound of heavy rain and wind hammering against the siding. I grabbed my phone to use the flashlight app, but the battery was down to 10%. My wife lit a couple of candles while the kids huddled close, trying not to freak out. The rain was coming down so hard it drowned out pretty much everything else. Thunder cracked overhead like a drum. After a few minutes, I looked outside the front window to check the street. That's when I noticed something weird. Every house on the block was lit up, like bright lights glowing through every window, as if the power was still on for them, but not ours. Our house was pitch black, except for the flickering candlelight inside. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks. I even stepped outside onto the porch, holding the phone's weak light in front of me. The street was soaked and shiny from the rain, and every other house had lights on. Living room lamps, porch lights, TVs, maybe. Some kind of glow that showed people were inside. I saw movement in a couple of windows, silhouettes walking around, but our house was dead silent. No light coming through. The storm was raging outside, heavy rain pelting against the windows. Something strange caught my eye. A soft, pulsing light hovering above the backyard trees. My wife joined me at the door, equally perplexed. The light shifted between pale blue and dull green, almost like it was breathing. Our kids watched from the kitchen window, eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and fear. I stepped out into the cold rain, the light hanging about 30 feet above the treetops. Trees swayed in the wind, casting long shadows in the otherworldly glow. Despite the heavy rainfall, the light remained steady, beating like a distant rhythmic pulse. I tried calling my parents, but my phone had no signal. The power was out at our house, but strangely, the neighboring homes seemed unaffected. My wife brought a flashlight from the kitchen, but its beam made no impact on the mysterious light. There were no visible sources, no bulbs, no wires, nothing attached to the surrounding trees. Moving closer into the yard, I felt the rain soaking through my jacket. The light seemed to respond to my movement, pulsing slightly faster, as if aware of my presence. I told my wife to stay inside with the children, but she followed me out anyway. Together, we stood watching the unexplained phenomenon. After a few minutes, The light's rhythm slowed, dimmed, and then vanished completely. The sky returned to darkness, as if the light had never existed. When I turned back toward the house, I noticed something odd. Our microwave clock was flashing, suggesting it had just experienced a power interruption. Inside, nothing worked. The light switches were dead, and a check of the fuse box revealed no signs of any electrical issue. We returned to the living room, lighting candles. The children sat quietly, too young to fully comprehend what had just happened. My wife and I exchanged a silent, meaningful look, both processing the inexplicable event we had just witnessed. The night started like any other. I was flying my Cessna 182 from Reading to Medford, a route I knew well. I'd done this trip around 50 times, usually delivering parts or small packages for my cousin's shop. This time, I'd taken off later than planned due to a cargo delay, which annoyed me since I didn't want to be landing after dark. The weather was clear, with a bit of haze to the west. The air was smooth and visibility was good. I was alone in the cockpit, with a single crate about microwave size secured in the back. As always, I checked everything twice before takeoff. Radios, transponder, fuel, altimeter, all looked good. I filed VFR and settled at 7,500 feet. The flight was routine, with only minimal chatter from Sacramento Way traffic. It was just past Shasta when I first noticed something unusual. Later that evening, after returning home, another strange experience unfolded. The rain had stopped, and I looked outside. The street seemed completely normal, except for our house. Neighbors' lights were on, but we were in complete darkness. My phone showed no signal, no connection to anything. I glanced at the sky, expecting storm clouds, but it was just dark. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. My wife declined my suggestion to check on neighbors, considering it too risky in the rain and darkness. We waited, hoping our power would return. Hours passed. Our house remained dark, while neighboring homes stayed fully lit throughout the night. When morning arrived, the storm had vanished. I stepped outside, expecting to find something unusual in the backyard where the strange light had been, but everything appeared normal. Wet grass, trees swaying in the morning breeze, nothing seemed out of place. I walked down the street and spoke with neighbors. They all reported no power issues overnight. No outages, no flickers, no weird lights. Back home, I checked the circuits again. The power company confirmed no regional outages. I still can't explain that night. The unexplained light, our house's blackout, while the street remained illuminated, the eerie silence, the feeling of being watched from the trees, it all felt like a glitch in reality. Now, sometimes when the power goes out and the wind is just right, I find myself staring out the back window, half expecting to see that pulsing light waiting in the sky. I was flying north over the forest between Dunmere and the state line when something caught my eye. A pale yellow dot, barely visible, hovered a few hundred feet off my wing. At first, I thought it might be another plane coming in from the west, but a quick scan revealed no navigation lights, no strobes, no fuselage, just that single faint glow. I radioed for a position check, asking if anyone had traffic at my 10. The tower responded negatively, nothing on radar. I tried to dismiss it, but my eyes kept darting to the light. It tracked me perfectly, maintaining the same distance and speed. Curious and slightly unnerved, I turned 10 degrees east to see if it would break away. No change. It adjusted with me, matching my angle and position with unnerving precision. No jerky movements like a drone, no jet-like speed, just smooth, calculated tracking. For 5 solid minutes, this continued. Feeling a mix of curiosity and anxiety, I made a sharp left bank, a tight turn I'd rarely attempt unless avoiding something. I expected the object to overshoot or fall back. Instead, it matched me flawlessly, locked into the same relative position, moving with an almost liquid grace. The movement defied explanation. Not aggressive or fast, but impossibly precise. Whatever this was, it had no trouble mirroring my every maneuver. Sweat began to form on my forehead. My grip tightened on the yoke as I struggled to maintain calm. I keyed the mic again, asking Medford Tower about any nearby traffic. My voice likely betrayed my growing unease. They responded calmly. No known traffic, no radar blips, nothing visual reported. The object wasn't large, maybe basketball-sized, but emitted a soft, ethereal glow. Not like a spotlight or flashlight, but more akin to a lantern behind frosted glass. Pale yellow with a hint of green. No sound, no flicker, no discernible solid form, just that enigmatic light. I wanted to rationalize it as a high-end test drone, but its movement contradicted that theory. Drones typically wobble or surge when adjusting. This thing glided as if floating on water, completely smooth and controlled. For another 10 miles, it remained with me. Then, just as mysteriously as it appeared, it vanished. I was camping alone off an old Forest Service road just west of Bend, Oregon. Late October, right before the snow really starts to stick. Nothing crazy, just a simple setup. One-man tent, sleeping pad, a jet boil, and my dog Nellie. She's a red heeler mix. Smart, a little neurotic, but a good trail dog. I'd rescued her from a shelter in Klamath Falls a couple years earlier, and she's been my go-to companion ever since. She sleeps light, which I always appreciated out in the woods. We parked just off a spur road that had been chewed up by logging trucks and hadn't been graded in years. I hiked in maybe a mile and a half to a clearing I'd been to once before. A flat patch near a shallow creek, surrounded by lodgepole pine and some younger firs. As we were descending toward Medford, something drifted behind the plane. I craned my neck, trying to see it, but it was behind the wing and out of view. I expected it to either appear on the other side or vanish completely, but it did neither. It simply wasn't there anymore. Gone, like flipping a switch. I called the tower again and requested a visual confirmation on final. They gave me clearance. No mention of any anomalies. I landed clean, taxied to the hangar, and shut everything down. By the time I got out, it was fully dark. No lights in the sky, no sound. Out of habit, I did a full walk around the plane before leaving. Everything looked fine. No burns, no scratches, no weird heat anywhere. The crate in the back was still latched tight. The guy from the shop met me at the hangar, made some joke about my hair sticking up, asked if the wind had been that bad. I didn't laugh. Later that night, I checked the flight data and radio logs. My position reports were all there, but nothing on the tapes about unknown traffic or unusual visuals. I called the tower the next day and asked if they'd pulled anything from radar in that area around my flight path. They hadn't. Said the skies were clear, not even a weather balloon. I tried to let it go, told myself it had to be some kind of atmospheric effect, maybe sunlight bouncing off something, even though it tracked me well after sunset. Lacey, my wife, told me not to obsess. She's right, probably. But I can't stop thinking about how it mirrored every single movement. Like it wasn't just following me, it was watching. The night had been long and dark, settling into my bones like the damp, gray weather from earlier. I'd set up camp around 5 p.m., just as the light began to fade. No cell service out here, just wind and the occasional squirrel rustling nearby. I made a small fire, cooked some ramen, and gave Nellie her kibble. She wandered the clearing's edge, nose down and tail up. By 7:30, darkness had fully descended. I packed up the fire and crawled into the tent, my Garmin watch on my wrist, a habit from solo trips. I always wear it, checking heart rate or altitude in the morning, nothing more. That night, I remembered the battery was at 71% before falling asleep. Around 2 a.m., Nellie's low growl woke me. Not a full bark, just a deep, throaty warning. I sat up, unzipped the sleeping bag, and listened. Silence. No footsteps, no breaking branches, just wind through the trees. I touched Nellie's back. She stayed rigid for a moment before settling down. Probably a deer or raccoon, I thought. Sleep eluded me after that. I dozed on and off, mostly listening. Nellie remained quiet. The night stretched endlessly, dark and heavy. When dawn finally broke around 6:45, I emerged, stretched, and started the jet boil for coffee. Nellie circled the clearing, sniffing the air before sitting near the tent, staring into the trees. Watchful, but not unusual. It was only when I sat down with my coffee that curiosity led me to check the watch. Scrolling through the GPS history, something strange caught my eye. A track logged between 1:58 a.m. and 2:44 a.m., labeled walk. Odd, since I hadn't left the tent. The start time matched exactly when Nellie had growled. The GPS path showed a near-perfect circle, looping around my tent about 15 feet out. A smooth, uninterrupted line with no erratic movements or doubling back. Coldwater Marsh was usually quiet, just dense reeds, muddy water, and narrow dirt trails snaking through the brush. Most people never gave it a second look unless they were fishing or birdwatching. That morning was especially foggy, thick enough that visibility stretched barely a few feet ahead. I was alone, my partner Kyle off that day, parked near the marsh edge around 7:30 a.m. My routine was straightforward. Check traps, ensure boundary lines were clear, watch for potential poachers or lost hikers. The heavy fog made everything feel muted and slow, as if the world had been hushed. Later, back at my campsite, something strange happened. My watch recorded a bizarre tracking log, 4 laps in a clearing, covering 0.57 miles over 46 minutes at an impossibly slow 20-minute-per-mile pace. The red trail on the screen looked too precise, too clean to be a mistake. I was certain I hadn't moved during that time. Nellie, my dog, sat motionless, staring intently into the trees, not tense, but intensely focused. The soft, damp soil showed no new footprints, no signs of movement. Unnerved, I packed up quickly. Coffee half finished, tent still damp, sleeping bag hastily stuffed into its sack. Nellie stayed unusually close, which wasn't her typical behavior. Normally, she'd wander while I packed, but that morning she remained within a few feet of me. We hiked out rapidly. Every snapping branch made me flinch. Back at the car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. I turned the watch off completely, leaving the mysterious track in the history, labeled simply as a walk. I haven't returned to that spot since. Something had happened. Something I couldn't explain. I'd been walking the trail's edge for hours with Luna, my high-energy mutt whose brindle coat blended with the morning mist. She was doing her usual routine, sniffing every puddle and root along the way. Halfway through our second loop, something unusual caught my attention. Muddy footprints veered off the path, cutting straight into the marsh grass. When I knelt down, the details were striking. These weren't ordinary prints. They were massive, human-shaped but enormous, nearly a foot long and twice the size of a normal adult's footprint. The prints were spaced evenly, suggesting a deliberate, slow walk. Strangely, the prints stopped abruptly about 15 feet into the marsh. No disturbance beyond that point. No visible path through the thick reeds and soggy ground. It was as if whoever, or whatever, made them simply disappeared. I tried taking photos, but the fog wreaked havoc on my phone's camera. The images came out grainy and washed out. Still, I sent a few to the park office, thinking maybe it was a local fisherman who'd wandered off course. Luna's behavior unnerved me. She was growling low, her body stiff, staring intently into the marsh where the footprints ended. I tried calling her off, but she remained fixated. The silence was eerie. Fog seemed to swallow sound and light, creating an unnatural stillness. For a moment, I thought I heard a faint splash deep in the reeds, maybe 50 yards away. But when I looked, nothing moved, just still water and swaying grass. Alking back to the truck, I felt watched. My boots sank into the mud with each step, and I couldn't shake the sensation of unseen eyes. By the time I reached my vehicle, the sun had burned away some fog, but the marsh still looked abandoned. A heavy, damp smell hung in the air. I live on the edge of a small Vermont town, with a backyard that stretches into woods behind the house. It's not large, maybe an acre, but plenty of wildlife passes through. Deer, rabbits, squirrels, and the occasional fox roam the area. Luna, my scrappy border collie mix with a burnt sugar-colored coat, typically spends evenings chasing shadows or investigating bushes. One late summer evening after dinner, I was sitting on the back porch with Luna stretched out at my feet. The sky was mostly clear, with a few low clouds, and the air felt warm but not humid. I was half focused on my phone, half watching Luna. Something caught my attention that night. When I went back to investigate, I found strange footprints in the marsh nearby. I told Kyle about them, and he joked that maybe Bigfoot had taken a day off. I laughed, but something didn't feel right. The next day, I returned with a small crew to search for more tracks. We found nothing. The marsh remained quiet, water still, with no additional signs beyond what I'd initially seen. At home, Luna became restless. She paced by the back door, staring intensely into the darkness, as if something waited just beyond the yard's edge. I checked the security cameras. Nothing appeared. Days later, reviewing the photos, I noticed something odd. A faint second set of smaller prints existed inside the larger footprints. The toes seemed too long and thin to be normal. Local wildlife experts and the county sheriff couldn't explain it, dismissing my concerns. I stopped visiting Coldwater Marsh. The fog, the silence, those prints, They felt like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. Recently, Luna started barking at the window again with that same tense, focused bark. Looking outside, I saw only an empty yard and low-rolling mist. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed a shadow moving beyond the trees. I don't know what made those prints or what I saw, but I'm certain of one thing. Whatever it wasn't human, and it's still out there. The evening was settling in, and I was lost in thought, watching darkness creep across the landscape. Something felt off. Every animal around me had gone completely still, which was deeply unnatural. Luna, my dog, sat rigid beside me, her ears pointed forward with intense focus. The wildlife was frozen in an eerie tableau. Squirrels suspended mid-movement, their noses twitching, but bodies motionless. Rabbits in the grass behind the shed stood like statues, ears perfectly upright. Even the usually hyperactive chipmunks had stopped their constant darting. Nearby deer, typically grazing peacefully at this hour, were transformed into living sculptures, heads raised, muscles tense, eyes fixed skyward. A strange silence blanketed everything. No rustling, no branch snapping, no movement, just an absolute stillness that felt like the world was holding its breath. Then, almost imperceptibly, a low hum began. At first, it was barely audible, more a vibration than a sound. Gradually, it grew, steady and continuous, reminiscent of a distant generator, but smoother, more ethereal. The animals remained completely motionless throughout. Luna let out a soft growl, but didn't bark or move. I tried scanning the darkening sky, but saw nothing. No planes, no helicopters, no lights. My phone's flashlight revealed nothing unusual. The humming seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, as if the sky itself was generating the sound. After about 5 minutes, the hum began to fade as slowly as it had appeared. Suddenly, the animals burst into motion. Rabbits darted into bushes, squirrels leaped between branches, and deer melted back into the tree line. Luna jumped up, eager to chase whatever had caused the disturbance. I remained on the porch, surveying the now empty yard. No footprints, no strange sounds, just a lingering sense of tension hanging in the air. Something had happened, but I couldn't explain what. The woods had always been familiar to me, but something happened that night, which I can't explain. Over 10 years of living here, I've never seen anything like it. Every single animal, big and small, just stopped and stared at the sky, frozen in place for about 15 or 20 minutes. I kept searching for a logical explanation. A rare bird? A distant storm? Some weird weather pattern? Nothing made sense. Nothing could explain how every different species could react so simultaneously. I didn't see any light, no shapes, no aircraft or drones, just an unexplained humming and complete silence. The next day, I talked to my neighbor Mark. His dogs had been barking at the tree line before suddenly going quiet, though he couldn't explain why. No one else in town mentioned anything unusual. Now, when I'm out at dusk, I watch the trees and listen, wondering if it will happen again. Luna, my dog, stays close, her eyes constantly scanning the sky like she's expecting something. I still don't know what it was, but I'm determined to understand what made everything stop and watch that night. My quest for answers began on a red-eye flight from Seattle to Chicago. Sitting in row 22 by the window, I was wide awake despite the dimmed cabin lights. The moon was just a thin crescent, casting a faint glow on the clouds below. Midway through the flight, something caught my eye outside the window. A small metallic sphere hovered near the plane, about 100 feet away. It wasn't blinking or flashing like typical aircraft. Instead, it hung perfectly still, reflecting moonlight. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of light or reflection. But then the sphere moved, matching the plane's speed precisely, around 550 miles per hour. I tried to point it out to the half-asleep woman next to me, but she barely glanced up. I was on the night shift at the Cedar Ridge Observatory in the Cascades, a small but significant research station. My job mostly involved monitoring telescopes and checking data streams. But something extraordinary happened that night. The sphere wasn't just something I could dismiss as a cloud or a bird. It stayed incredibly close to the plane, pacing alongside us for at least 5 minutes without changing distance. It moved like it was riding the slipstream, perfectly synchronized with our aircraft. What made it truly strange was its appearance. The surface was smooth and metallic, almost mirror-like, but without a real reflection, more of a dull sheen. Around it, Clouds drifted normally, but the sphere caused no turbulence. No jet wash, no air pressure shifts, nothing you'd expect from an object moving at that altitude. After those few minutes, it suddenly changed direction. Drifting upward, it disappeared into the thicker, gray, wispy cloud layer. I watched the same spot for a while, but it never reappeared. The other passengers slept or remained quiet. Flight attendants continued their rounds, and the captain said nothing over the intercom. If I hadn't seen it myself, I might have thought it was just an optical illusion or a trick of the light. When we landed in Chicago, I searched for any reports of strange sightings over the Midwest that night. Nothing. No news, no radar activity, no other passenger accounts. Back home, I shared the story with friends. Most brushed it off as a drone or weather balloon, but this was different. No blinking lights, no sound, no logical movement. Now on other flights, I find myself watching the clouds, half expecting to see that sphere again, but it's never there, just the same empty, silent sky. I still don't know what it was, a quiet presence that moved perfectly with us and then vanished, leaving no trace behind. My job that night was monitoring the observatory systems while the research team slept. It was a quiet shift, mostly paperwork and occasional troubleshooting, exactly the kind of work that suits someone who prefers solitude. The observatory sits on an isolated ridge surrounded only by dense forest and open sky. Spring nights here are usually cloudy, but this particular evening was different. The sky was crystal clear, with every star visible, which had the astronomers particularly excited. We had 4 telescopes tracking different sections of the sky, and I was watching the logs and running routine checks. Around 1:15 a.m., something strange happened. Telescope 3's signal suddenly vanished without warning or error messages. The monitor went completely blank, as if the feed had been abruptly cut. I tried resetting and reconnecting, but nothing worked. The last image captured was what truly unsettled me. A blurry, shifting shape covering nearly half the telescope's view, smearing across the stars as if moving incredibly fast. This made no sense. The telescope was housed in a locked dome, and the security system showed no signs of intrusion. I reviewed the security footage for the past 2 hours, which revealed nothing unusual. The usual raccoons had been spotted earlier, but nothing was near the dome when the signal dropped. I called Dana, my coworker who lives in a cabin on the property, but she hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. A chill ran down my spine as I sat staring at the frozen screen. The room felt warm, yet I couldn't shake an inexplicable sense of unease. Suddenly, the power flickered, causing all monitors to blink off and on, but only the observatory's equipment was affected. When I stepped outside for air, the forest seemed unnaturally still, as if holding its breath. The stars blazed overhead, bright and endless, except for one peculiar patch of sky that seemed different. I left my sister's place in Hutchinson around 11:40 p.m. Summer nights like these never fully cool off, with dry heat clinging to everything. My truck's AC had been broken for a year, so I drove with the windows down, a warm breeze just barely keeping me from sweating through my shirt. At the observatory, something felt off from the start. Along the ridge, shadows seemed to cross the sky, barely visible before vanishing. My border collie mix, Jasper, usually calm at night, suddenly perked up and started growling softly from his nearby kennel. I walked down to check the power box. Everything looked normal, no blown fuses, no unusual readings. The blinking stopped. When I tried reconnecting to Telescope 3, the feed remained dead. Then things got strange. A text buzzed on my phone from an unknown number. Just one word, look. I checked outside. The forest was still, and Jasper watched me closely. I didn't reply. Turning on the TV didn't help. No news or weather reports mentioned anything unusual. Around 3 a.m., a soft mechanical hum came from Telescope 3's dome, steady and constant. I grabbed my flashlight, Jasper following close behind. The dome was locked tight. No way anyone could have entered. The hum stopped when I approached. Checking the camera feed one last time, I noticed the blurry shape wasn't random. It was elongated, almost organic, like a shadow moving just out of focus. I spent the rest of the night watching the sky and screens. No more blurs, no lost signals, but a lingering feeling remained. Something had brushed against the edge of everything I knew. At dawn, I packed up and drove home through empty mountain roads. Jasper sat quietly in the back seat. The next day, the observatory replaced the telescope's camera, but never discovered what caused the blackout. I still don't know about the blur, the power flicker, or the mysterious text. But now, whenever I look up at the stars, a part of me wonders what might be out there, just beyond sight. The drive from Hutch to Nickerson is pretty straightforward, about 35 minutes if you don't get stuck behind a slow-moving tractor or camper. Just endless Kansas highway, with grain elevators dotting the horizon and soy fields stretching out on both sides. Around 5 or 6 miles outside of town, a bright light caught my eye in the sky ahead. At first, I figured it was a plane from the Wichita airport, but something was off. No blinking, just a steady white light hanging there, slightly larger than usual. I brushed it off initially. 10 miles later, the light was still in the exact same spot. Venus? Maybe? But it seemed too low, too bright. My mind started playing tricks, nothing else to look at on that dark stretch between Medora and Yagi. I kept glancing up, and sure enough, it was there every time. Except it wasn't just sitting still, more like gliding alongside my road, hovering just above the northwest tree line. I tested it out, slowing down to see if it would react, and it did, matching my speed almost perfectly. I sped up, it kept pace. Familiar landmarks passed by, the old collapsed silo, that abandoned produce stand, the turnout where high school kids used to hang out. The light remained constant, feeling almost like an escort or observer. The radio was off, though I hadn't consciously turned it down. Just the wind and tire hum filling the car. When I flipped on the radio, only static and garbled signals came through. An underwater-sounding country song, a faint Christian talk radio station. I switched it back off. Passing the river bend near Sand Hill State Park, something shifted. A strange pressure built behind my eyes. Not painful, but dense. A thickness I couldn't quite explain. My ears popped, and suddenly everything felt different. The light was just hanging there, motionless, even though the road's elevation hadn't changed. I glanced up again, swallowing hard. Still present. Something inside me decided to stop, not out of fear exactly, but to prove to myself that it wasn't moving, just a fixed point of light I'd let my imagination inflate. I pulled into the gravel turnout near the old pump station by the creek and cut the engine. The wind vanished instantly. No breeze, just complete silence. Standing outside, I looked up. Gone. It hadn't moved, dimmed, or drifted behind a cloud. No clouds existed. It simply wasn't there anymore. Walking around to the truck's front, I squinted, searching the sky. Nothing. Just ordinary stars now, a few barely visible through Hutch's ambient glow. 2 full minutes passed as I stood listening. No insects, no creek frogs, no rustling grass. Everything seemed to be holding its breath. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in the truck, startling me. Checking it revealed no service, just a missed notification from an unknown source with no message. I'd experienced similar incidents in poor signal areas, but this felt different. Returning to the driver's seat, I restarted the engine and pulled back onto the road. Within 5 minutes, the air had changed. Not cold, but cooler, with my windows fogging slightly. Using the defrost, I looked up to find the light had returned, higher, smaller, as if pulled straight back into the sky. Yet it remained perfectly centered ahead of me. What unsettled me was its unwavering alignment. No matter how much I curved, slowed, or accelerated, it maintained its position above the road. The light accompanied me the entire drive, following as I turned onto Sterling Road, past the grain co-op and rail crossing, staying just above the tree line. Pulling into my driveway, I sat with the engine off, watching through the windshield. My porch light illuminated the scene, the mailbox, on steps, and my neighbor's rusted swing set, while that persistent light remained overhead. 3 winters ago, on a Tuesday night, I was living alone in a rental house on the outskirts of Montana. The place was perfect, close enough to town for work, but far enough that you could walk into your backyard without seeing another porch light. It backed up to old Forest Service land, mostly pine and rock. Quiet, just the way I liked it. I was working night shifts doing snowplow contracts for the city, with shifts starting at 10 p.m. and running until the roads were clear. But that particular night, they'd canceled the rotation because the expected storm never hit. Roads stayed dry, so I had the night off. I stayed in, made a frozen pizza, and fed Buster. My dog, a mutt that looked like a golden retriever mixed with something scrappier. I watched half a hockey game, then turned in early. The last thing I remember was checking my phone at 10:43 p.m., plugging it in, and seeing that little lightning bolt charging icon. Around 2 a.m., Buster woke me with a low, rumbling growl from his bed at the foot of mine. He didn't bark or stand up, just grumbled like he smelled something off. Half asleep, I told him to knock it off, figuring he'd heard a deer near the tree line. Later, I saw a light across the field. It didn't move, looked smaller now, higher, but still present, exactly in the same spot. I opened the door and stepped out. Nothing. It was gone again. I didn't linger. I went inside, locked up, and stood by the window with the lights off, staring at the sky. Nothing unusual happened for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep much. The next day, I checked weather apps and flight trackers. Nothing was showing up over that part of the state. Clear skies, no alerts. I even called a buddy who used to fly crop dusters. He said I probably saw a drone or weather balloon, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. It's been a few months since that drive. I've gone the same route half a dozen times since, day and night. Never saw the light again. But I don't take that turnout near the pump station anymore. I don't even look in that direction when I pass it. Just keep driving. I woke up around 7 that morning and took Buster out for a quick walk before making coffee. As I stood in the kitchen, I noticed a voicemail notification on my phone. Strange, since the signal at my house was usually terrible. No missed call, just an unknown number. I put the message on speaker and listened. For the first 30 seconds, there was this deep, low humming sound, like standing near high-voltage lines or a big transformer. Underneath, a soft, grainy static played, similar to a bad radio station. No voices, no clicks, just that steady vibration. Then it happened. My name, whispered twice. Connor. Pause. Connor. A male voice, quiet but clear. Not emotional, not threatening, just checking if I was listening. Then silence. I played it again. No distortion, no glitches. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. Suddenly, I remembered Buster growling earlier. I looked around the house. Everything seemed normal. Doors locked, windows closed, no strange footprints outside. Without really knowing why, I deleted the voicemail. It just felt wrong to keep it. I tried to rationalize it as a prank, maybe a spoofed number. But something nagged at me. There was no call record anywhere. Not in my phone log, not in my online account. That night, I stayed up late watching TV, volume cranked up. Buster stuck closer to me than usual, which only happened during storms or when something spooked him. Around midnight, he went to the sliding door and stared into the yard for 5 full minutes. Ears up, body tense. But he didn't bark. When I looked out, there was nothing, just snow, darkness, and trees. 2 nights later, another voicemail arrived. Unknown number. Same time, 2:09 a.m. This one was shorter, about 20 seconds. Mostly static with weird, distant clicks, like someone tapping on glass. Something else was there at the end, but I couldn't quite make it out. I was sitting in the living room, lights low, scrolling through nothing on my phone when it happened. Buster slept on the rug, everything quiet. Then the humming started, not from the phone, but outside. Low, steady, pulsing like it was coming from above the house, barely audible. I stood up and listened. This wasn't the heater or the fridge or power lines. It was deeper, without echo. When I slid the back door open and stepped onto the deck, the night was clear. Stars filled the sky. Cold air hung motionless with no wind. The hum stopped suddenly. No fade, no gradual decline, just gone. Looking up, I noticed something strange. A patch of sky, about the size of my outstretched hand, was completely black. Not obscured by clouds, just missing. I blinked, squinted, waited. After maybe 10 seconds, stars returned. Not all at once, but one by one, as if something had moved through that space. Earlier that week, a voicemail had come through, like breathing. One long, slow inhale. No voice, no name. I didn't delete it right away. I played it 3 or 4 times, trying to hear something more. I even held the phone to Buster, who reacted immediately. His ears flattened, and he walked out of the room. I deleted the recording before bed. That weekend, I drove to Missoula to stay with my sister. I told her work had been slow, but really, I just didn't want to be alone at the house. My phone stayed quiet during the visit. When I returned, I walked the property. Nothing seemed out of place. No tracks, no signs of anyone around. My landlord lived 2 hours away and never visited unless something broke. I didn't know anyone who might be messing with me. I didn't sleep that night, or much afterward. No more voicemails came through, but I changed my number anyway. I kept Buster close and stayed out of the woods. I never reported anything because there wasn't anything concrete to report, just a couple of recordings and a sky that went blank for a few seconds. I still don't know who or what said my name. That weekend in the Colorado Rockies changed everything for me. I've never been one to believe in strange stories, but what happened has haunted me ever since. My buddy Darren and I were just looking for a simple camping trip, a brief escape from city life. We drove up on a Friday afternoon, navigating increasingly rough dirt roads that wound higher into the mountains. Eventually, we discovered a hidden clearing near a creek, a spot Darren had once found on an old hiking forum. It wasn't marked anywhere, just a quiet little place tucked away from the world. Early October brought crisp, cold air, and darkness fell quickly. We set up camp efficiently, Darren pitching the tent while I collected firewood. Rufus, his big, goofy mutt, explored the area with unbridled enthusiasm, sniffing every inch of our campsite. Dense pine forests surrounded us, their thick branches creating a dark canopy, with the creek providing a soft background soundtrack. Our first evening was completely ordinary. We ate canned chili, drank some beers, and chatted casually. The night sky was crystal clear, stars blazing overhead. Rufus settled between us, occasionally raising his head to listen to the forest sounds. Everything changed around midnight. A strange rhythmic knocking began, not from the ground or trees, but from above. It was methodical, almost like a coded message. Tap, pause, tap, pause. Neither random nor natural. Darren and I exchanged worried glances, sitting up and listening intently. Rufus sensed something was wrong. He stood up, growling softly, ears alert, and focused on something we couldn't see. Then Darren spotted them, 3 red lights hovering between and the pine tops, blinking in a slow, deliberate, triangular pattern, completely silent and unnaturally still. We weren't dealing with any ordinary explanation. These weren't drones or conventional aircraft. Something else was watching us that night in the wilderness. We were camping deep in the woods when something strange happened. That night started like any other, quiet and dark, with just the usual forest sounds. But then everything changed. The lights weren't like typical drone LEDs. They blinked one at a time, steady and deliberate, almost like a signal. No buzzing, no engine noise, just an odd knocking sound synchronized with the blinking. I tried focusing my eyes to see if I could make out any shape around the lights, but there was nothing visible. 3 perfectly spaced red points hung impossibly still in the air. The knocking continued, calm and rhythmic, seeming to emanate directly from the lights themselves. Darren and I watched silently, not daring to move. The forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no owls, no rustling, just those strange lights and their steady knocking. After about 10 minutes, the lights began blinking faster. The knocking sped up too, then suddenly everything stopped. Blackness and stars returned, as if nothing had happened. We waited, but the lights didn't reappear. My phone showed no signal, which wasn't surprising given our remote location. Darren swept his flashlight across the clearing. Everything looked normal, the creek still flowing, Rufus sniffing cautiously. We tried to rationalize what we'd seen, joking about camper pranks, but we both knew there was no one else around for miles. The next day revealed no evidence of anything unusual. No footprints, no disturbances, no tracks or trash. That night, the knocking didn't return, but an unsettling feeling lingered. Rufus stayed close to Darren, growling at shadows I couldn't see. We packed up early and left, eager to put distance between ourselves and that clearing. During the drive down the mountain, I kept scanning the sky, half expecting those red lights to reappear. To this day, I can't explain what we experienced. No book, no story matches those silent, floating lights and their strange, rhythmic knocking. I've shared the story with friends, but no one understands. It remains a mystery, something inexplicable that happened in the dark space between the trees. I woke up that morning around 4:40, emerging from a deep, disorienting sleep, the sky still dark and full of unanswered questions. It was dark, and something felt off. The light seeping under the bedroom door looked different, somehow dimmer and strange. I pulled on my usual morning gear, boots and a hoodie, and headed out to check the pastures, a routine I've followed for 2 decades. Every morning starts the same: coffee, boots, field check. But this morning was different. When I stepped onto the porch, an eerie silence surrounded me. No birds chirped, no insects buzzed, not even a whisper of wind through the trees. The ground was bone dry despite the light rain from the previous day. I crouched down, rubbing the dirt between my fingers to confirm what seemed impossible. Our pasture stretches behind the barn, about a 1/4 acre of open grassland with a couple of feed troughs. We run 15 head of cattle, nothing extraordinary. Initially, in the darkness, I couldn't see them, but when I rounded the barn's corner, I froze. All 15 cattle stood perfectly still in the middle of the field. Not grazing, not resting, just standing, aligned in a loose, unnatural formation facing the same direction. They were utterly motionless. No huffing, no tail swishing, no weight shifting, completely frozen. I waited, watching for any movement. Nothing. Something else caught my eye. The weather vane atop the barn was slowly spinning, turning counterclockwise, impossibly without wind. Normally rusted and stiff, it rotated with an unsettling steadiness. I scanned the field, then back to the vane, then to the cattle. Walking closer, I felt a strange pressure building in my chest. Not painful, but heavy, like underwater weight. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. My footsteps, the air, even the sound of gravel crunching beneath my boots felt delayed. I called out louder, expecting some reaction. Still, the cattle remained perfectly still. No blinking, no movement, just frozen. I stepped outside and noticed the cows weren't facing north. They were angled slightly east, maybe east-northeast, with the sun just barely starting to tint the sky behind them. I went into the barn, grabbed a flashlight, and checked everything. The feed area, grain bins, fence line. No breaks, no tracks. The cows' water troughs were still full, and nothing seemed disturbed. When I came back out, something had changed. The vane had stopped spinning and was now facing west, with no wind. An uneasy feeling settled over me, like my insides were buzzing. I put my hand on the barn's side and noticed it felt warmer than the surrounding air. Then one cow moved, just one near the center, taking a step forward and letting out a low, rough grunt as if waking up. Slowly, others followed. Within 30 seconds, they were all shifting, looking around, and resuming grazing like nothing unusual had happened. I stood there, feeling completely alone, not just physically, but in a deeper sense, like nothing else in the world was awake. I checked my phone, 5:07. I wasn't sure how long I'd been outside, but it felt like maybe 10 minutes. The experience was strange enough that I wrote the time on a sticky note, wanting to remember the details. I didn't tell my wife immediately. She's not one to jump to conclusions, and I knew she'd probably suggest the cows were spooked by an animal. I wanted to convince myself it wasn't as weird as it seemed. Later that afternoon, while filling the horse's water trough, I spotted something else. Near the far end of the pasture, there was a mark that first looked like dead grass. Walking closer, I realized it was a perfect oval. Not a burn mark, but flattened as if something heavy had been set down and lifted without dragging. The grass was bent inward from all directions, with no tracks leading to or from the spot. About a week after finding the strange mark in the field, I started keeping a notebook. Nothing since then has been quite like that morning, but I began logging dates and odd occurrences, strange sounds, unusual lights, animals acting weird. The mark itself was roughly 8 feet across, maybe 4 feet wide, positioned dead center where the cows had been staring. I didn't touch it, just observed and walked away. That night, I watched the pasture through the window, but nothing happened. No strange lights, no odd sounds, no more frozen cows. The next morning, the mark remained. The cows gave it a wide berth, grazing right up to its edge before veering away. I walked through it once. The grass crunched under my boots like it had been sun-dried, though the day wasn't hot. For a brief moment, the air above felt slightly cooler. Could have been nothing. Over the next week, it faded. By the 6th day, it was barely visible, but the cows still avoided that spot. I checked the weather vane every morning for about a month. It didn't spin again. Weeks later, my son and I were in the backyard, a typical late summer night. We were out with his telescope, a Christmas gift from my dad. The sky was clear, stars brilliant against the dark backdrop. We took turns looking through the scope, me pointing out constellations I remembered from childhood, him eager to show me Mars. The night was peaceful. Cricket sounds, a distant car humming down the road. Suddenly, he nudged me and whispered, "Dad, look up!" When I followed his gaze, I froze. Something massive blocked the stars, a dark solid shape stretching across half the sky. Unlike clouds or anything normal, it was completely still, silent, huge, bigger than any plane or bird I'd ever seen. The stars simply vanished behind it, like a blackout curtain had been drawn across the heavens. The night was quiet, and something massive hung overhead, motionless. No sound broke the silence, no engines, no wind, just an unnatural stillness. My son held his breath, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and wonder. The hairs on my neck stood up, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a weird cloud or some optical illusion. I grabbed the infrared scope from the night observation kit his science teacher had recommended. Aiming it at the shape revealed nothing but a black void. The screen showed normal heat signatures, trees, small animals moving across the yard, our house, but this shape was just absent. No heat, no distortion. It was like something was there, yet wasn't. "Dad," my son whispered, "it's like it's not really there." I agreed, wanting to understand what we were seeing. We sat frozen, watching stars disappear behind this silent, unmoving presence. I considered calling my wife to witness this, but how could I explain a giant, soundless shadow blocking the night sky? Instead, I checked my phone for weather alerts, radar, anything that might explain this. No planes, helicopters, weather balloons, or storms showed up. The shape remained unchanging. Nighttime sounds slowly returned, frogs croaking, leaves rustling in a light breeze, but the dark form hung motionless. Looking through the telescope again yielded only blackness. My son murmured, "It's like it's watching us." I nodded silently, feeling the same eerie sensation but reluctant to voice it. After about 30 minutes, the shape began to shrink. Not moving away, just fading like a projector being switched off. Stars reappeared exactly where they'd been before. I quietly packed up the telescope. My son continued staring upward, clearly processing our extraordinary experience. Weeks have passed since that night, and the backyard has returned to its usual state, stars shining as they always have. But something lingers. Sometimes, when I'm outside alone after dark, I find myself glancing upward, half expecting to see that strange black shape cutting across the night sky. It happened during a hike I typically take alone. Early fall, midweek, with trees just beginning to change colors and a crisp, damp morning air. I'd been walking for about an hour, enjoying the quiet trail and the sounds of leaves crunching underfoot. My phone was off and tucked away in my backpack, earbuds in my ears more out of habit than anything else. Then something strange occurred. A noise started in my earbuds, not music, but something else entirely. At first it was faint, like static with an underlying rhythm. It sounded almost like a conversation, but in no language I recognized. The sound was garbled, electronic, distorted, reminiscent of those sci-fi scenes where aliens attempt communication but remain incomprehensible. I initially thought it might be a nearby prank or a malfunction with my earbuds. But when I stopped and pulled them out, they were unplugged and completely silent. My phone was off, zipped securely in my pack. Yet the sound had been unmistakably real. Later, when I told my son about it, he said it felt like a dream. We've gone back out a few times since, but that unexplained phenomenon never repeated itself. What I can't shake is how it was there, yet not really there, not blocking the sky, leaving no heat, no sound, nothing normal at all. I don't know what it was. Honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. I was out flying my drone in a big open field just outside town on one of those late afternoons in early fall where the sun hangs low but the air stays warm. I had my earbuds in, not really paying attention to anything except keeping the drone steady. When the first weird sounds started coming through, I thought maybe something was wrong with my headphones. I pulled the earbuds out, checked them, and then put them back in. The noise returned, soft but distinct enough to make my skin crawl. At first, I figured I was just tired or imagining things, so I kept walking along the trail. But the sound persisted, low and rhythmic, like voices talking back and forth. Only these weren't human voices, something else entirely. I glanced behind me, expecting to see another hiker or someone messing around, but the trail was completely empty, just trees and the fading afternoon light. The more I listened, the more unsettled I became. These sounds weren't like any language I'd ever heard, but they weren't random either. They felt deliberate, as if something was trying to communicate through my earbuds. I slowed down and looked around. The forest felt heavier, like the air had thickened. Without realizing it, I was holding my breath. Then suddenly, the noises stopped. I hadn't moved, but something about the atmosphere shifted. It was too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. Turning slowly, I scanned the trees and underbrush. Nothing was there. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, louder than before. I decided to remove the earbuds completely this time. The moment I did, the forest seemed to come back to life. Birds started calling. A gentle wind shook leaves from the branches. Shaking my head to clear my thoughts, I continued hiking back along the main trail. An unsettling feeling persisted, like something had been following me, just beyond my sight. When I finally reached my car, the parking lot lights were flickering on in the darkness. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls, no strange signals. I can't explain what that noise was or why it came through my unplugged earbuds. I'm not someone who typically gets worked up about strange experiences, but that day felt different. Something seemed to be lurking just beyond the edge of perception, attempting to make contact without fully revealing itself. One thing's certain, I'm not eager to return to that trail alone again. The open field was perfect for drone flying, with no tall obstacles and a clear sky. I was about 20 minutes into my flight, capturing slow sweeping shots of the trees and horizon for a project. The wind was light, gently ruffling the grass tops, and everything was quiet except for the soft buzz of the drone's motors. Suddenly, the controller's screen flickered and went black. The drone lost signal. I assumed it was just a temporary glitch, maybe some interference or a weak signal spot. I tried moving around, waving the controller to re-establish contact, but nothing worked. The feed didn't return. Normally, the drone would automatically return home when losing signal, but this time everything was silent. No warning beep, no automatic return. I kept checking the blank screen, hoping for any sign of life. Since I wasn't far from the drone's last known position, maybe a couple hundred feet away, I started walking toward it, scanning the sky and the field. The landscape was mostly grass with scattered dirt patches and wild flowers. Eventually, I spotted the drone sitting on the ground near the field's edge, just past a small grove of trees. Physically, it looked undamaged, which made the signal loss even more puzzling. Back at my truck, I plugged the SD card into my laptop to review the footage. Initially, everything appeared normal, smooth shots of the field and treetops. But about 2 minutes before the feed cut out, something strange happened. The camera pointed straight up, capturing thickening gray clouds slowly moving across the late afternoon on sky. That's when I saw it, a metallic shape in the clouds. It wasn't like any airplane or weather balloon I'd ever seen. More of a dim, reflective blur with defined edges, almost like a thin, flat panel suspended just inside the cloud cover. Not quite a solid object, but definitely something unusual. The drone camera caught something unusual, a movement that wasn't natural. It shifted abruptly, not smoothly, but with a sharp, precise change in direction. For about 10 seconds, I had a clear view before the feed suddenly cut out. No static, no glitch, it just ended. I replayed the footage repeatedly, desperate to convince myself it was a trick of light or a cloud formation. But the movement was too distinct, too deliberate to be dismissed. The day after losing the signal, I returned to the field, hoping to uncover the source of the interference. The field was eerily quiet. Gone were the familiar sounds of chirping birds and rustling grass. An unnatural silence hung in the air, as if the entire landscape was holding its breath. Setting up the drone again, I noticed the controls felt sluggish, resisting my commands. The signal wavered, and the screen flickered with faint static. As I began packing up, a pale blue light caught my eye near the field's edge. It hovered low over the grass, pulsing softly twice. I froze, wondering if it was a reflection or a trick of light. But there were no nearby cars, houses, or windows to explain the glow. Just as quickly as it appeared, the light vanished, switched off like a light. From that moment, an unsettling sensation of being watched consumed me. Every glance skyward felt like an invisible presence was tracking my movements. My phone remained inexplicably silent, devoid of messages or notifications. Strange sounds began haunting my nights, low hums and occasional tapping just beyond clear perception. Unnerved, I stopped flying the drone, needing time to process what I'd experienced. Weeks later, I returned to the field in the late afternoon, the same time I'd originally lost the signal. As I set up the drone and scanned the area, that same feeling of being observed crept over me. I was up in the Adirondacks last October, desperate for one final hike before winter set in. A week away from everything, I'd rented a small cabin near Stillwater Reservoir. No frills, just a wood stove and blessed silence. My dog Rook, a lanky black and white mutt from an Albany rescue, usually gets anxious in new places, but loves the woods. On my third day, the weather turned strange. Warm and humid, more like late August than mid-fall. Most leaves had fallen, making the trail slippery. I decided to take a side loop off Red Horse Trail, an old logging road the cabin owner had mentioned, a quiet route with almost no foot traffic. I set out around 10:30 a.m., taking my time and stopping for lunch by a creek. Rook was in his element, chasing squirrels and exploring every scent. My plan was to return by 3 p.m. As the afternoon wore on, the trail became increasingly difficult to follow. Not overgrown, exactly, but indistinct. A thick carpet of wet leaves covered the ground, and the trees began to look eerily similar in every direction. I wasn't particularly concerned. I had a compass, and my phone's GPS usually worked once I gained some elevation. Still, I found myself glancing around more frequently than normal. Then it happened. No visible boundary, just a sudden change. The air felt different, thicker somehow. My ears popped sharply, both at once. Rook froze, not like he'd heard something, but as if he'd hit an invisible barrier. His tail dropped, and he began backing up slowly, seeming unsure if he was allowed to move. When I called to him, my voice sounded flat and strange. No echo, no forest sounds underneath, just absolute silence. No wind, no birds, just me and Rook in this inexplicable void. Later, I flew my drone in the area. Half an hour of flight, some good shots, and then home. But something lingers. I can't explain what was in those clouds or why the drone momentarily lost contact. Sometimes, looking up at a clear sky, I catch a glimpse of something moving differently, something beyond my understanding. I stepped forward, maybe 5 or 6 feet, and immediately felt something strange. The air changed, like walking into a pressure bubble that made my skin prickle, similar to standing too close to a static-filled TV. Rook stayed back, stiff and unmoving, avoiding my gaze. I pulled out my phone out of habit. No signal, but the clock read 2:47 p.m. This didn't make sense. Wasn't it just before 1 p.m. when I stopped for lunch? I hadn't been walking that long, wasn't tired, hadn't eaten or napped. I remembered the entire hike up to this point, yet somehow nearly 2 hours had vanished. Backing out the way I came, my ears popped again. Forest sounds rushed back. Wind in branches, birds chirping, a squirrel scampering through brush. Rook bolted to me, pressing against my leg and shaking as if he'd been freezing, though the air was warm. I stared at the spot I'd just exited. From the outside, nothing looked different. Same trees, rocks, light, but something felt fundamentally wrong, like a forest trying to impersonate itself. I attempted to go around the area, thinking it might be a weird weather patch, but no matter which direction I moved, I kept returning to the same spot. I marked trees with bright orange tape from my pack, watching in disbelief as the markers disappeared after just 20 yards. I'd tie a piece to a low branch, take 10 steps forward, turn around, and it would be gone. Unnerved, I followed my original trail back. The return journey took almost twice as long, and the sun had already dropped behind the ridge by the time I reached familiar ground. Not a single hiker crossed my path that day. Back at the cabin around 6 p.m., my legs ached as if I'd completed a 20-mile loop. Yet my GPS tracker told a different story, showing only 5.4 miles traveled. Strangest of all, it had cut off at 12:52 p.m. and resumed at 3:06 p.m. from nearly identical coordinates. What happened that night would stick with me forever. The wood stove cast a warm glow inside the cabin, but Rook was anything but calm. He paced restlessly, ignoring his food, alternating between staring out the window and checking the door. Every few minutes, he'd lie down in the corner, only to jump up again almost immediately. Hoping he might need to relieve himself, I let him outside. The moment the door opened, Rook darted away. I grabbed the flashlight and chased him down the trail. About 50 feet from the cabin, he stopped dead, hackles raised, intently focused on a specific patch of woods. Something strange was happening with the flashlight. The beam didn't just flicker like a dying battery would. It seemed to bend and warp, as if something was pulling at the light itself. Rook followed me back to the cabin without hesitation, which was unusual for him. Around 2 a.m., a high-pitched buzzing woke me. It was faint, reminiscent of a distant dentist's drill. The sound started low, grew slightly, then abruptly cut out. Rook sat up, staring fixedly at the wall, his eyes locked on something outside that I couldn't see. After the buzz stopped, complete stillness descended. I didn't investigate. The next morning, I packed up early and left, telling the cabin owner I wasn't feeling well. He simply nodded, seemingly unsurprised, and said, happens. I apologize, but the text you've provided appears to be incomplete or cut off. Could you please share the full original text that you would like me to rewrite? I'll be happy to help you restructure it once I have the complete passage.